I didn't even bother to call. On the night of their third wedding anniversary, while Amelia sat alone at a table set for two, candles burning down to nothing, Marcus Hale sent two text messages. Not a phone call, not an apology. Two cold, indifferent lines on a screen that told her everything she had spent 3 years refusing to believe. Something came up. Don't wait. And then, 20 minutes later, we need to talk. About us. That was it. That was the man she had married. But what Marcus didn't know, what no one knew yet, was that Amelia was already holding a pregnancy test in her trembling hand when those messages arrived. And by the time he finally decided their marriage deserved a conversation, she was already gone. If you've ever felt invisible inside the life you built, stay with me. This story will remind you that walking away is sometimes the bravest thing a person can do. Subscribe to this channel and follow Amelia's story all the way to the end, because what happens next will shock you. Hit the like button and drop a comment telling me which city or country you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. PA. The pregnancy test had been sitting in Amelia's coat pocket for 6 hours before she finally took it out. She hadn't planned to buy it. She had walked into the pharmacy on Lexington Avenue that afternoon only because she needed aspirin. Her head had been pounding since morning, the kind of slow, relentless throb that no amount of water or quiet seemed to fix. But something made her stop in front of the display. Something she had been quietly ignoring for 2 weeks finally refused to be ignored any longer. She bought it without thinking too hard. She told herself it was just to rule something out. She was wrong. Now she sat in the bathroom of the penthouse on the 54th floor, still wearing the dress she had put on 4 hours earlier for their anniversary dinner, and the 2 lines on the plastic stick were perfectly, unmistakably clear. No squinting required, no holding it up to the light, just 2 lines side by side, telling her that her life had just become something she hadn't planned for. She should have felt something warm. That's what she had always imagined. Warmth, disbelief, maybe even a few tears of the good kind. She had imagined it before, in a quiet and private way she never admitted to anyone, including herself. The moment she would find out, the way she would call Marcus, the way his voice would change. Instead, she sat on the cold marble floor and listened to the silence of the penthouse, which was the loudest silence she had ever heard. Marcus wasn't home. Marcus was never home by 6 anymore. She had stopped keeping track of his reasons around the time she realized the reasons had stopped sounding like reasons and started sounding like rehearsed lines from someone who had long since stopped trying to be convincing. She got up, washed her hands, looked at herself in the mirror for a long time. The woman looking back at her was 34 years old and had not looked truly rested in at least 18 months. She was still objectively beautiful. She knew that, not with vanity, but with the flat acknowledgement of someone who had been told it so many times it had become a piece of furniture, something she stopped seeing. But there was a tiredness behind her eyes that foundation couldn't reach. The kind of tired that comes not from lack of sleep, but from the sustained effort of pretending everything is fine, when everything has been quietly, steadily, not fine for a very long time. She put the test in her coat pocket. She didn't know why, she just didn't want to leave it on the counter. The dining room table had been set since 5:30. The restaurant had delivered. Marcus's assistant had arranged it, just as his assistant arranged most things that were supposed to look personal, but weren't. 2 plates, 2 glasses, a bottle of red wine she hadn't opened. She had lit the candles herself because she wanted at least one thing that evening to feel like it came from her own hands. She sat down. She poured herself a glass of water because she wasn't going to drink the wine. Not now. She looked at Marcus's empty chair. At 6:47, her phone buzzed. Something came up. Don't wait. She read it twice. She set the phone down. She picked it up again and read it a 3rd time, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something that made sense. This was their 3rd anniversary. She had reminded him 4 days ago. He had nodded and said, "I know, I've got it handled." She had wanted to ask what that meant, but she hadn't, because asking Marcus to clarify things he'd already said always felt like accusing him of something, and she was so tired of every conversation feeling like a negotiation. She blew out the candles. Not dramatically. She just leaned forward and blew them out one by one, which somehow felt worse than doing it in anger would have. 20 minutes later, the 2nd message arrived. We need to talk. About us. Amelia read those 5 words and felt something inside her chest go very still. Not break. She would realize later that things had stopped breaking a long time ago, that what she'd been feeling for months wasn't pain anymore but numbness, which is what pain turns into when it has nowhere left to go. She understood exactly what those words meant. We need to talk. About us. Was not the beginning of a difficult conversation between two people trying to save something. She knew what it was. She had known, in some deep and unspoken place, for a long time. She stood up from the table. She walked to the bedroom closet and took out a coat. Not a suitcase, just her coat, because she wasn't thinking about luggage or logistics or where she was going. She was running on something older and more instinctive than planning. Her hands found her purse. Her feet found the elevator. She left the front door unlocked. She didn't leave a note. The elevator opened into the lobby and she walked past the doorman who said, "Good evening, Mrs. Hale," and she said, "Good evening, Robert," because even in the middle of everything falling apart, she was still the woman who remembered the doorman's name, and that small detail, that reflexive politeness in the middle of catastrophe, was maybe the most honest thing about her. Outside it was raining, not the dramatic cinematic kind of rain, just the cold, gray, relentless kind that New York does in October, the kind that soaks through your coat before you realize it's happening. She didn't have an umbrella. She walked anyway. She had grown up in Dayton, Ohio, and sometimes in moments of real stress she thought in the rhythms of that place. The flat, plain-speaking directness that Manhattan had taught her to sand down, but had never quite removed. Her mother had been the kind of woman who said what she meant and meant what she said, and didn't see the value in decorating the truth. Amelia had spent years learning to fit into Marcus's world, which ran on carefully decorated truths and the strategic deployment of appearances, and it had cost her something she hadn't fully named until right now, walking alone in the rain on a Brooklyn side street she had wandered onto without really meaning to. It had cost her the sound of her own voice. Not literally, but somewhere between the charity galas and the careful dinner conversations and the years of answering "We're great," thank you to people who asked how they were doing, she had lost the habit of saying the true thing. She had become fluent in the language of fine. She stopped walking when she realized she was shivering. She looked up at the street around her and had a moment of genuine disorientation. Not dangerous, not scary, just the sudden awareness that she was standing in the rain without a destination, which was, she understood, a fairly accurate description of the last 3 years. Light spilled out of a restaurant window to her left. She could see people inside, the warm and ordinary movement of a weeknight dinner service. A hand-painted sign above the door read Moretti's in faded gold letters. She almost kept walking. She was not the kind of woman who walked into restaurants alone. Not because she was afraid to, but because she had spent so long being Marcus Hale's wife that she had forgotten that she existed without him, in context that had nothing to do with him. She went inside. The restaurant was small in the way that New York places sometimes manage to be. Not cramped, but intimate. Every inch used thoughtfully, the kind of room that felt considered rather than designed. It smelled like garlic and red wine and something baked, and the warmth of it hit her all at once, and she stood just inside the door for a moment with rain dripping off her coat, feeling suddenly and acutely conspicuous. A man behind the bar looked up. He was not what she expected, though she hadn't been expecting anything, which might have been why he registered so clearly. Late 30s, dark-haired, the kind of face that looked like it had seen things and not been diminished by them. He was drying a wine glass, and he stopped when he saw her, not in a surprised way, more in the way of someone who was simply paying attention. "You're soaked," he said. It was a statement, not an observation designed to embarrass her. "I didn't have an umbrella," she said, which was probably the most obvious thing she had ever said to a stranger. "Sit down," he said. "I'll get you something warm." She almost said, "I'm fine, I'll just sit for a minute." The reflexive fine was right there, fully loaded, but she was standing in a stranger's restaurant soaking wet on her anniversary, holding a pregnancy test in her coat pocket, and fine was so obviously the wrong word that even she couldn't deploy it. She sat at the bar. His name was Dante Moretti. She learned this because he introduced himself before she thought to ask, which struck her as an old-fashioned courtesy that she hadn't encountered in a long time. He set a cup of tea in front of her. Not coffee, tea, which was what she actually wanted, and she hadn't told him that. He sat across from her on the other side of the bar, and he did not ask her what she wanted to talk about, or whether she was okay. He just let her be wet and cold and present. which was, she was starting to realize, more than most people offered. You cook? She asked, because she needed to say something that wasn't about herself. My grandmother did, he said. I just kept the place running. She's gone? 10 years now. He said it simply, without performance. She would have told you to eat something. I'm not hungry. You've been walking in the rain on an empty stomach, he said, so probably you are. She almost argued. Instead, she let him bring her bread, and she ate it, and the simple physical act of eating something warm in a warm room did something to her composure that she hadn't anticipated. Her eyes filled, which she was furious about, and she looked at the counter and blinked and breathed through her nose until the feeling passed. Bad night? Dante asked. No sarcasm, no agenda. Third anniversary, she said, before she decided to say anything. He was quiet for a moment. Alone? He texted, she said. Twice. Dante didn't say anything, and she was grateful for it, because she didn't need someone to tell her that was bad. She knew it was bad. She had known for a long time, and she had kept constructing elaborate explanations for it because the alternative, admitting what it actually was, required a courage she hadn't found yet. She found it somewhere between the bread and the second cup of tea. I found out tonight that I'm pregnant, she said, and I don't think he's going to be happy about it. The words landed in the quiet of the restaurant, and she felt them leave her body like something she had been carrying in her lungs. Dante looked at her for a long moment. Not with pity, not with the slightly panicked expression of a man who has accidentally wandered into an emotional situation he doesn't know how to exit. He looked at her like she had said something real, and he was treating it as real. Then he's a fool, Dante said, or he's something worse. He's going to want me to... She stopped. She couldn't finish the sentence. You don't have to tell me, he said. I know. She wrapped both hands around her cup. I think he's been seeing someone. I don't have proof. I never asked for proof because asking for proof means being willing to hear the answer, and She stopped again. I kept telling myself it was stress, that he was under pressure, that we'd get through a hard year and come out the other side. How many hard years? Dante asked quietly. She thought about it. All of them, she admitted. Every single one. That was the true thing. That was the thing she had never said out loud to anyone, not even herself, not clearly, not with that kind of blunt precision. All of them. Every year of their marriage had been a hard year in some way that she had found a reason to excuse. The missed dinners, the holidays spent in rooms full of his colleagues where she smiled until her face ached, the way he talked over her in conversations, the way he stopped asking about her work, the way his hands stopped finding hers in the back of taxis. All of it had added up to something she had refused to name. You stayed, Dante said. That's not a weakness. People stay because they still believe something is possible. Or because they're afraid, she said. Also that. He didn't try to contradict her. What are you afraid of right now? She thought about the penthouse, about the life that existed in it, the address, the account, the identity she had built or had built around her. She wasn't always sure which, about calling her mother and hearing the particular silence that would follow, which would not be cruel but would carry the weight of things her mother had never said but had always quietly worried. I don't know who I am without it, she said. The life, She gestured vaguely at something that included everything. I know it sounds like someone who's been someone else's idea of herself for too long, Dante said. She stared at him. My grandmother used to say that some people will make a home of you if you let them, he said. They'll move in and rearrange everything, and after a while you forget what it looked like before. Amelia sat with that for a moment. Then her phone buzzed. Marcus, again. I'm coming home tonight. We should talk. She looked at the message. She thought about the table she had set, the candles she had blown out, the dress she was still wearing, the coat pocket where a pregnancy test sat wrapped in a piece of paper towel she had folded around it almost tenderly, the way you handle something fragile even when you're not sure it deserves care. She thought about what we should talk had sounded like in his texts all evening. Cold, managed, strategic. The language of a man who is preparing to deliver something, not receive it. She turned the phone face down on the bar. Dante reached into the breast pocket of his jacket and set a card in front of her. Simple white, just a name and a number. No title, no company, nothing that explained who he was or what he did. She noticed that. If tonight turns into something you can't handle alone, he said, call that number. She picked up the card. You give this to everyone who walks in out of the rain? The ghost of something that wasn't quite a smile crossed his face. No, he said, I don't. She held the card in her fingers and looked at him, and she wanted to ask who he actually was. The restaurant felt like only a small part of whatever the answer to that question was. She could sense the shape of something larger behind the simplicity of the room, the way you can sometimes sense a weight you haven't been told about yet. But she didn't ask. Not tonight. Tonight she had already said more true things than she had in the past 3 years combined, and she was running low on whatever resource truthfulness requires. Thank you for the tea, she said, and the bread. Get somewhere dry, he said. She pulled her coat tighter and stood up. She paused at the door. My name's Amelia, she said. I know, he said. And then, before she could ask how, he added, You look like someone who's spent a long time being called Mrs. Someone Else. She walked out into the rain. The penthouse was dark when she got back. Marcus wasn't there yet. She stood in the center of the living room for a long time, dripping on the floor, looking at the space she lived in, which was beautiful and expensive and felt almost completely empty, the way a stage looks after the actors have left, but the lights haven't been turned off yet. She went to the bathroom. She changed out of the wet dress. She sat on the edge of the bed and she took the pregnancy test out of her coat pocket, and she looked at it one more time. 2 lines. Still 2 lines. Not going anywhere. Marcus came home at 10:43. She heard the elevator, heard the door, heard the particular way he moved through a space, efficient, purposeful, never uncertain, the walk of a man who had decided in advance what every room was for. He appeared in the bedroom doorway. He looked at her sitting on the edge of the bed, and his expression did something complicated. Not guilt, not relief, not the look of a man who had missed his wife. Something more like calculation. Something that was already constructing the conversation before it started. You're here, he said. I wasn't sure you'd be here. Where would I go? She said. He came in and sat in the chair across from her, and he was quiet for a moment, and she recognized that silence. It was the silence of a man choosing between several versions of what he was about to say, running them quickly for efficiency and consequence. This isn't working, he said. No preamble. She had to give him that. Which part? She asked. Amelia. His voice had that particular flatness she had come to associate with his hardest moods. Not angry, not cold exactly, more like the emotional equivalent of a blank document. You know which part. I'd like you to say it. A flicker of something crossed his face. Irritation, she thought, at being asked to do the thing directly rather than letting it be implied. Marcus had always preferred implication. Implication was efficient. Implication avoided accountability. I think we've grown in different directions, he said. I think we both know it. I think the kindest thing— I'm pregnant, Amelia said. The word kindest died in his mouth. The silence that followed was not like any silence she had experienced in that room before. It had weight and temperature. She watched his face and she saw it. The thing she had been dreading, and also, somewhere beneath the dread, the thing she had needed to see to finally understand what she was dealing with. A series of rapid, private calculations moved behind his eyes. Not joy, not even surprise that had room for joy inside it. Something that honestly looked like a man encountering an obstacle. How far along, he said. Not are you sure? Not when did you find out? How far along, sir? The question of a man determining the logistical parameters of a situation. I found out tonight, she said. I found out tonight, and then you texted me that we needed to talk. And so I'm telling you. He stood up. He turned toward the window, which she recognized as his move when he was thinking something he wasn't ready to say yet. Put the city lights between himself and the conversation by a few seconds. This changes things, he said to the window. I know, she said. We'll need to figure out, Marcus. Her voice was very quiet. Look at me. He turned around slowly. I need you to understand something, she said. I need you to understand that I can see exactly what you're doing right now. I can see it. I've been watching you construct the management strategy for this conversation since you walked in, and I need you to know that I see it. His jaw tightened. That's not fair. I'm not trying to be fair, she said. I'm trying to be honest. That's different. He looked at her, and for just a moment she saw something that might have been the actual Marcus. Not the brand, not the executive, not the person he had decided to be for public consumption, but the real one, somewhere underneath all of that. And what she saw was a man who was afraid, not of losing her, afraid of losing control of something. "I'll call my lawyer in the morning," he said, and the real Marcus vanished back behind the managed one. "We'll work something out." She nodded. She didn't say anything else. After he left the room, she sat alone for a long time. Then she reached into her coat pocket, the wet coat hanging on the bathroom door, and took out the small white card. She looked at the name, Dante Moretti. She thought about what he'd said. "You look like someone who spent a long time being called Mrs. Someone Else." She picked up her phone. She dialed the number. It rang once. "I've decided," she said when he answered. A pause. "What did you decide?" "To stop being invisible," she said. Another pause. Then, quietly, "There's a car 7 minutes away. Tell the driver the name on the card." She stood up. She put on shoes. She picked up her purse, and she left her phone on the bed. The phone with Marcus's contact at the top of the call log. The phone full of unanswered texts and managed silences, and 2 years of carefully worded nothing. She left without packing. She left without leaving a note. She walked to the elevator and pressed the button and waited. And when the doors opened and she stepped inside, she felt the specific and profound sensation of a person who has just made a decision they cannot undo and has realized, somewhere in the part of themselves that knows things before the mind catches up, that not being able to undo it is exactly the point. The lobby doors opened onto the street. A black car waited at the curb. The driver didn't ask where she was going. He already knew. And as the car pulled away from the building that had been her address and her cage for 3 years, Amelia pressed her hand flat against her coat, against the pocket where the pregnancy test had been, now empty. And she made the only promise that mattered. "Not for me," she thought. "For you." The city lights blurred past the window. She didn't look back. The car smelled like leather and something faintly cedar, and it was warm in a way that hit Amelia all at once the moment she settled into the back seat. Not the artificial warmth of a heater cranked too high, but the kind that suggested the car had been running for a while before it arrived, as if someone had anticipated that she would need it. The driver didn't speak. He didn't ask for an address or introduce himself or make any of the small talk that car services train their drivers to make. He simply pulled away from the curb with the calm efficiency of someone who already knew exactly where he was going, which meant Dante had arranged this before she called. Or at the very least, the moment she called, the machinery had moved faster than she could track. She noticed that. She filed it away. The city moved past the windows in wet streaks of orange and white, the particular visual texture of New York in the rain at night, which was something she had always found beautiful in a punishing kind of way. She pressed her back against the seat and breathed. Her hands were in her lap and she made herself keep them still because she had a tendency, under stress, to pick at the skin around her thumbnail until it bled, which was a habit she'd had since she was 11 years old and had never entirely broken, regardless of how many versions of herself she'd tried to become since then. She thought about Marcus. She thought about the way his face had rearranged itself when she said the word pregnant, not into something broken or tender or even frightened, but into something that was fundamentally managerial. The brief calculation, the inventory of consequences. She had watched a man decide in real time what a baby was worth to his current situation, and the answer she had seen in his eyes before he could control his expression was the most honest thing he had said to her in years. It was enough. It had been enough for a long time, actually. She was only now admitting it. The car crossed the bridge and left Manhattan behind, and Amelia watched the skyline recede through the rear window without feeling the pull she had expected to feel. She had always assumed that leaving would come with grief, the particular weight of abandoning something you'd invested in, even if the investment had returned nothing. But right now she felt mainly the absence of weight, which was its own strange sensation, like the first breath after being underwater longer than you meant to be. The drive took 40 minutes. She didn't ask where they were going. She had made a decision and she was staying inside it. The estate was not what she'd imagined, though she realized she hadn't imagined anything specific. She just had a vague cinematic sense of gates and guards and architecture designed to communicate danger. What she found instead was a large stone house set back from a private road, surrounded by old trees that in the dark looked like they'd been growing there longer than the house itself. Lights burned in the lower windows. The rain had slowed to a mist. Dante was standing outside the front door when the car pulled up, which meant he had been watching for it. He was still dressed as he had been in the restaurant. No jacket now, shirt sleeves, which was perhaps the least guarded she would ever see him in terms of appearance, though she didn't know that yet. He opened the car door before the driver could. "You didn't pack anything," he said, looking at her empty hands. "I didn't think about it." "That's fine." He stepped back to let her out. "We'll handle it." She stood in the damp night air and looked at the house and then at him, and she felt the particular vulnerability of someone who has made a dramatic decision and is now standing in the practical reality of it, which is always less cinematic than the moment of deciding. "I need to understand something," she said, "before I walk in there." "All right." "Who are you?" "Not the restaurant, not the card." She looked at him directly. "Who are you that you have a car 7 minutes away at 11 o'clock at night and a house that looks like it has a staff, and you're not surprised when a woman you met 2 hours ago calls and says she's leaving her husband?" Dante was quiet for a moment, not the silence of someone deciding how much to lie, more like someone determining where to start with the truth. "Come inside," he said. "I'll tell you." "Tell me out here." He looked at her. Something shifted slightly in his expression. Not annoyance, more like recalibration, the recognition that she wasn't going to be managed any more easily than she'd allowed Marcus to manage her, and that this was going to require a different approach. "I run things," he said. "Businesses, mostly. Some of them are the kind that don't get listed in trade publications. I have people who work for me and people who owe me and people who are afraid of me, in varying combinations. The restaurant is real. It was my grandmother's and I kept it because she asked me to. But it's not how I make my living." The mist settled on her hair. She absorbed what he'd said. "Are you dangerous?" she asked. "To most people, yes," he said. "To you, no." "How do I know that?" "You called me," he said, "not the other way around." She stood with that for a moment. It was a fair point. She had called him. Whatever was happening, she had initiated it, which meant the fiction of being swept along by someone else's decision was not available to her tonight. "Okay," she said. "Okay?" "I said okay." She walked toward the door. "Are you going to stand there or are you going to show me inside?" The inside of the house was warmer than she expected and quieter. She had anticipated a certain kind of underworld aesthetic, heavy furniture, oil paintings of men with bad intentions, the visual grammar of crime as she had absorbed it from movies and television. What she found was more like a home that a serious person actually lived in, books in actual use, a kitchen that smelled like something had been cooked in it recently, furniture chosen for durability rather than impression. A woman in her 60s appeared from a hallway and looked at Amelia with the frank appraisal of someone who was loyal to Dante and reserving judgment on everything else. "This is Rosa," Dante said. "She runs the house." "She's wet," Rosa said to Dante, as if Amelia were not standing there. "I know." "She needs dry clothes and food." "I know." Rosa looked at Amelia. "Come," she said, and the word was not unkind, but it was not a request either. Amelia followed her. She showered and changed into clothes Rosa provided. Simple things, well made, that fit well enough to suggest someone had made an educated guess about her size. She ate soup at a kitchen table at midnight, and Rosa sat across from her drinking coffee and didn't say anything, which Amelia found unexpectedly comfortable. She was so accustomed to silences that demanded filling that a silence which simply existed felt like its own form of hospitality. "How long have you worked for him?" Amelia asked eventually. "Since his grandmother," Rosa said. 23 years. "Is he a good man?" Rosa considered this with the seriousness the question deserved. "He is a man who keeps his word," she said finally. "In the world he operates in, that is not a small thing." "That's not exactly what I asked." "No," Rosa agreed, "but it's the truest answer I have." Dante found her an hour later in the library, a room she'd wandered into simply because it was the warmest, and because books were the one category of object that had always made her feel less alone. She was sitting in a chair by the window, not reading anything, just being still in a room full of things that had nothing to do with Marcus Hale. He came in and sat across from her and said nothing for a moment, which she was beginning to understand was something he actually did rather than a performance of patience. "You should sleep," he said. "I'm not tired." "You're exhausted. That's different from not being tired." She looked at him. "What happens tomorrow?" "Tomorrow depends on what you want." "I want a divorce," she said. It was the first time she had said the word out loud, and she waited for it to land badly, for some emotional reckoning to arrive. But what she felt instead was something closer to relief, the sensation of a word finally matching a fact. "I want to be out of that marriage, and I want to protect—" She stopped, put one hand briefly against her abdomen, then moved it away because the gesture felt too vulnerable for a room she'd been in for less than 2 hours. Dante watched her hand. He didn't comment on it. "My attorney can make contact in the morning," he said. "We can file before Marcus has time to establish a narrative." "He already has one," she said. "He's been building it for months. The public image, the devoted husband. He's good at narrative." "He's good at narrative when he controls all the information," Dante said. "He doesn't control it anymore." Something in his tone made her look at him more carefully. "What do you know about Marcus?" A pause. Not guilty, but measured. "I know enough." "That's not an answer." "No," he said. "It's not. But it's what I can give you tonight. Tomorrow, when you're not running on adrenaline and rain and a very difficult evening, I'll tell you more. What I can tell you right now is that Marcus Hale has been careful for a long time about making sure that the people around him know only what he wants them to know. He will not like losing that control. And when men like him lose control of a situation, they tend to reach for the tools they're most comfortable with. Which are? Money, Dante said, and the appearance of virtue. Marcus called her phone 17 times that night. She knew this because Rosa had retrieved it from the car. It had fallen out of her coat pocket and left it on the nightstand in the room she'd been given. She saw the notifications in the morning when she woke up. 17 missed calls, 6 text messages. And then, at 3:47 in the morning, a single voicemail that she pressed play on with a feeling like pressing on a bruise. Amelia. His voice in the recording was different from the voice she'd heard in the bedroom the night before. Not the managed flatness, but something rawer, and she might have been moved by that rawness, except that she had known Marcus long enough to know that he had a register he used when he was afraid, and it sounded exactly like this, and it was not the same thing as being genuinely sorry. "I need you to come home. We can figure this out. Whatever you're doing right now, wherever you went, you need to come home so we can handle this the right way. Amelia, call me back. Handle this." She deleted it. By 9 in the morning, she was sitting across from Dante's attorney in a room that was clearly designed for exactly this kind of conversation. Neutral, quiet, the kind of space that communicated that whatever you said here was being taken seriously. The attorney's name was Elena Vasquez, and she was perhaps 45, with the focused energy of someone who had gone through fire at some point in her career and come out the other side with her precision intact, but all her illusions burned off. "Tell me everything," Elena said. "Not tell me what's relevant or start from the beginning. Everything." Which implied she already knew there was more than Amelia had offered yet. Amelia told her. Not cleanly. She went backwards and sideways in the way that real things get told rather than the way testimony gets structured. She backtracked and corrected herself, and there were 2 moments where she had to stop and breathe through her nose because the facts, when assembled in sequence for someone else to hear, had a cumulative weight that her private processing of them hadn't quite prepared her for. 3 years of specific, numbered injuries. The missed events. The conversations that were never had. The money she didn't have direct access to because Marcus had always said it was cleaner to run the household through his accounts. The fertility question they'd discussed 18 months ago that he'd tabled by simply never raising it again. The conference in Dubai that he'd said was 2 days but his assistant had let slip was 5. Elena wrote and didn't react, which was professional. But once, near the end, she looked up from her notepad and said, "Has he ever been physically—" "No," Amelia said, "never that." "But you were afraid of something." She thought about it. "Of not being believed," she said. "Of the version of events he would tell being more convincing than mine. He's very good at being the reasonable one." Elena nodded. "He won't be the reasonable one for long," she said. Amelia looked at her. "What does that mean?" Elena glanced toward the doorway, as if checking something she couldn't say yet. It means that Mr. Moretti's team has been doing some background on Marcus Hale for longer than last night. And what they found is going to make the divorce straightforward, because Marcus Hale is not going to want this going to discovery. The word discovery sat in the room like something with mass. What did they find? Amelia asked. That's a longer conversation, Elena said, and one I think you should have directly with Mr. Moretti when you're ready. What I need from you right now is authorization to make initial contact with Marcus's legal representation. Do it, Amelia said. Marcus found out she wasn't coming home at approximately 10:15 that morning when his own attorney called to relay that Amelia was represented, that a filing was being prepared, and that any direct contact with his client should cease immediately. He was in his office on the 38th floor when the call came through. His assistant described what happened next to someone she trusted, who eventually described it to someone else, which is how information moves in the networks that surround men like Marcus Hale. He did not throw anything. He was not the kind of man who threw things in his office. But he went to the window. The same move he'd made in the bedroom the night before. The city as a buffer between himself and a fact he needed a moment to absorb. And he stood there for a long time. Then he made 4 phone calls in quick succession. The first was to a private investigator named Carver, who Marcus kept on retainer for situations that required discretion. The second was to his publicist. The third was to a journalist at a paper he had a relationship with, the kind of relationship built on occasional access and mutual convenience. The fourth was to a man whose name did not appear in Marcus's contacts under his real name, which meant it was the call that mattered most, though no one outside that conversation would know it yet. Within 48 hours of Amelia leaving the penthouse, Marcus had filed a missing persons report. The story that emerged in the press, carefully, strategically, through channels that could not be easily traced back to him, was of a distraught husband searching for a wife who had disappeared without warning, who had been under emotional strain, who had a history of anxiety that her husband had been quietly and lovingly managing for years. Not stated explicitly. Implied, in the particular way that Marcus managed implications. He gave one brief statement to a reporter. I'm just focused on finding Amelia and making sure she's safe. And the photograph that accompanied the coverage was one of them at a charity event 18 months earlier, both of them smiling in evening wear, Amelia in blue, Marcus with one hand at the small of her back. She was shown the article by Rosa, who put a tablet on the breakfast table without comment and let Amelia read it herself. She read it twice. Her hands were very still. He filed a missing persons report, she said. Yes, Rosa said. He's telling people I disappeared. He's suggesting you weren't well, Rosa said carefully. Amelia set the tablet down. She looked at the window. He's doing it before I can say anything. He's getting the narrative out first so that whatever I say looks like... She stopped. So that I look unstable. So that the pregnancy looks like... She stood up abruptly and went to find Dante. She found him in a room she hadn't been in yet. Clearly an office, clearly a working one, not decorative, with the controlled disorder of a space where real decisions got made. He was on the phone and he held up one finger when she came in, not dismissively, but as a signal that he knew she was there and he would be with her in a moment. She waited. She stood in the middle of the room, and she was vibrating with something that was not quite fury and not quite fear, but had the properties of both. He ended the call. He filed a missing persons report, she said. He's saying I disappeared. He's telling the press I had... She made a gesture that expressed the unsayable. That I had some kind of episode, that he's worried about me. I know, Dante said. I saw it an hour ago. And? And my publicist is already working on a counter. Amelia, I want to make a statement, she said. I want to go on record, today. I want people to know I left voluntarily. I am not missing. I am not unstable. And I am fully capable of... I understand, he said. And you will. But not today. Why not today? He stood up from behind the desk. He was taller standing than she kept remembering, and there was something about the way he moved in his own space. Unhurried, like a man who had never needed to rush because things tended to rearrange themselves in his direction, that under different circumstances might have been intimidating. Right now it was the one thing in the room that felt solid. Because today Marcus is reactive and scared, Dante said. A scared man makes mistakes. If you respond immediately, you take that pressure off him. He becomes the wronged husband defending against an attack. If you wait, he fills the silence himself. and the things he says to fill it will be useful to us. She stared at him. You want to let him keep doing this? For 72 hours, Dante said. That's all. 72 hours, and then we respond in a way that he cannot recover from. People are reading that article right now, she said. My friends, my mother, people who know me and who are going to wonder. Your mother needs to hear from you, Dante agreed. Call her, tell her you're safe and that you'll explain everything soon. That's not going public, that's just telling the truth to someone who loves you. She breathed. She hated that he was right. She hated it with the specific hatred of someone who wants to act and is being told to be patient, which is maybe the hardest thing to do when you are frightened and angry and 8 weeks pregnant and your husband has just implied to a national newspaper that you lost your mind. 72 hours, she said. 72 hours. She sat down in the nearest chair and she pressed her palms flat against her thighs, and she breathed through the impulse to do something immediately, which was everything in her, every instinct, screaming to move, to act, to make noise, to exist in a way that Marcus could not control. Tell me what you found, she said. About Marcus. Elena said you'd been looking into him. Tell me what you found. Dante sat back down. He folded his hands on the desk. How much do you know about his company's financing? He said. The broad strokes, she said. Real estate development, some portfolio investments, a construction subsidiary. He always kept the details. She paused. He kept the details away from me. I asked once, early on, whether I should know more about the financial structure. He said I didn't need to worry about it. He said that because if you'd looked closely, you would have found things he couldn't explain. The room was very quiet. How bad? She asked. Dante picked up a folder from the desk and opened it. He turned it toward her. She looked at the first page. Columns of numbers, company names she didn't recognize, dates. Her eyes moved over it and her brain began doing the work of interpretation almost against her will, because she had a degree in finance from a university. Marcus had eventually found a way to make feel like a quaint biographical detail rather than an actual qualification. These companies, she said slowly, these are shell entities, Dante said, registered in 3 different jurisdictions. The money moves through them in a pattern that looks like investment activity, but isn't. The actual destination, he pointed to a number in the bottom right corner of the page, is here. Accounts that are not connected to any of the public-facing business on paper. She looked at the number. Her stomach turned over slowly. That's a lot of money, Dante said. Yes. Where does it come from? He looked at her steadily. Investors who believe they are participating in legitimate real estate development and are not. People who have put their retirement savings and their trusts, and in some cases their entire financial existence, into projects that exist primarily as vehicles for moving money that came from somewhere it shouldn't have come from. She sat with that. He's been defrauding investors, she said. For at least 6 years, Dante said, possibly longer. The structure gets complicated the further back you go, which is intentional. The complexity is the camouflage. She was quiet for a long time. Outside the window, the trees moved in a light wind. She thought about the dinners she had sat through, the weekends in the Hamptons, the investors' retreats she had attended as Marcus's wife, smiling at men and women who had handed over their money in good faith. She thought about how Marcus had always dismissed her questions about the business with the particular gentleness of someone managing a person they consider charming but not serious. He knew I'd figure it out eventually, she said, if I'd had access. Probably, Dante said. That's part of why he kept me at the edge of everything, not just... She stopped. She felt the reordering of the last 3 years in real time, facts rearranging themselves under new light, the emotional abuse gaining a structural explanation that didn't make it better but made it legible in a new way. He hadn't kept her out of the finances because he was controlling. He had kept her out because she was smart enough to see through it, and he had known that from the beginning. She had married a man who had looked at her intelligence and decided it was a risk to manage. He's going to come after me, she said, not because he wants me back, because I'm a liability now. If I go public with the divorce, if there's any kind of legal discovery, yes, Dante said, he's going to try to discredit me before I can talk. He already started. She looked at the article on Rosa's tablet, still open on the corner of the desk where she'd left it. The photograph. Her own face smiling at a camera at a fundraiser for children's literacy, of all things, being used right now to suggest she was a woman who couldn't be trusted to tell her own story. Something moved through her that was past anger. Not beyond it, but deeper than it. Something that had been sitting beneath the surface of her composure for longer than she could accurately measure. "I need you to understand something," she said to Dante. "I am not a project. I am not someone you rescued. I walked out of that building on my own, and I made my own call, and whatever happens next, I am not going to spend it being someone else's protected object. Do you understand what I'm saying?" He held her gaze. "I understand exactly what you're saying." "Good." She stood up. "Then tell me what I can actually do. Not in 72 hours. Right now. What can I do right now?" Dante was quiet for a moment, and she saw him recalibrate the way he had outside in the damp dark the night before, not backing down from her, but adjusting, the way someone does when they've correctly identified that the person in front of them is not going to respond to management and requires something different. "Right now," he said, "you can call your mother, and then you can sit with Elena and we can document everything you remember about those investor dinners, names, dates, what Marcus said about the projects, anything you witnessed. Your testimony matters, Amelia. Your direct first-hand witness testimony is going to matter enormously." She looked at him. "To who?" He held the folder up slightly. "I have a contact at the FBI's Financial Crimes Division," he said. "They've been building a case on the edge of Marcus's network for 2 years. They're missing the inside angle." The word inside landed in the room with considerable weight. She understood what he was offering. She understood that saying yes to it crossed a line that had nothing to do with a divorce anymore, that it moved from the private collapse of a marriage into something much larger and much more permanent. There was no version of what he was describing where she and Marcus found their way to a quiet settlement and went their separate directions. There was no version where this stayed manageable. She thought about the voicemail. Handle this the right way. She thought about the article, her own face being used against her. She thought about the pregnancy test still wrapped in a paper towel in a coat pocket in a room upstairs, and the thing she had promised in the back of a car at midnight to someone who couldn't hear her yet, but who was, regardless, already the most important person in whatever her life was about to become. "Set up the meeting," she said. Dante looked at her for a moment. Not the calculating look, not the considering look. Just a look. The kind that means something was confirmed that needed to be confirmed. "It'll take a few days to arrange," he said. "In the meantime, Marcus is going to escalate. Now that his attorney knows you're represented and you're not coming home, the missing persons report was just the first move. He'll go after the assets next, try to freeze anything that has your name on it, isolate you financially. He's done it before in other contexts." She heard the last 4 words, and they snapped her attention to him. "Done it before." Dante didn't look away. "You're not the first person Marcus Hale has tried to manage out of a situation," he said. "You're just the first one who left before he could finish the process." She stood in the middle of the office, and that sentence rearranged something fundamental about everything she thought she had understood. Not the first. She had come into this marriage believing, despite all evidence to the contrary, that whatever was wrong between them was specific to them, was the product of 2 particular people who hadn't worked out the way anyone had hoped. The possibility that what she'd experienced was something practiced, something Marcus had done before with sufficient success to have a process, was a different and considerably colder revelation. "Who else?" she said. "A woman named Patricia Dunmore," Dante said quietly. 3 years before you. The relationship ended when she signed an NDA in exchange for a settlement. The terms of the agreement prevented her from discussing Marcus's business practices, his personal conduct, or anything she had witnessed during their time together. She stared at him. "He paid her off." "Substantially." "And before that?" "We're still looking," he said. She sat back down. The chair caught her because she needed it to. She was not the first. She was not some exception, some unlucky convergence of 2 incompatible people. She was the latest iteration of something deliberate. He had done this before and been successful enough to believe he could do it again, and if she had been even slightly more afraid, or slightly less angry, or if her mother had picked up the phone that evening instead of the random chance of walking into a restaurant that had a hand-painted sign in faded gold letters, she would have been managed. She would have been handled. She would have signed something and disappeared, and Marcus Hale would be standing in his office on the 38th floor right now with the complete confidence of a man who has never faced a consequence. She pressed her hands flat on her thighs again. breathed. Is Patricia Dunmore safe? She asked. Dante looked at her with something she couldn't quite name. She is. Does she know what's happening? Not yet. Can she? Amelia stopped. Thought. If she's willing, if the NDA can be challenged, or if the FBI… One step at a time, Dante said. But yes, that's a thread worth pulling. She nodded. She was very quiet for a moment, and then she said, in a voice that was not theatrical about it, that was just the true voice underneath all the voices she'd learned to perform. He thought I'd disappear quietly. Yes, Dante said. He thought I'd be afraid enough. Yes. She looked at the folder on the desk, the columns of numbers, the shell companies, the years of deliberately constructed deception, the architecture of a man who had decided long ago that other people existed in relationship to his risk management strategy and for no other reason. I was wrong, she said. And something in the room shifted, not dramatically, not with any music or wand, or the kind of external confirmation that moments like this get in stories that are tidier than real life. It shifted the way real things shift, which is quietly and without ceremony, and with the weight of a door that is closed behind you before you fully realized you were walking through it. There was no path back now. Not to the penthouse, not to the marriage, not to the version of herself that had eaten anniversary dinner alone, and told herself maybe next year would be different. Marcus Hale had filed a missing persons report to describe a woman who had left of her own free will, who was standing in a room 40 miles from Manhattan with a federal case beginning to take shape around the man she used to call her husband. He was going to find out very soon that the thing he had managed to do for years, control the story, was no longer his to control. And the most dangerous part, the part that Marcus and his considerable strategic intelligence had failed to account for, was that Amelia was not angry in the loud and visible way that made people predictable. She was angry in the quiet way, the way that lasts. The call to her mother lasted 11 minutes. Amelia sat on the edge of the bed in the room Rosa had given her, and she held the phone against her ear and listened to her mother's voice move through the full spectrum of responses in roughly the order she had anticipated. First relief that she was safe, then confusion, then the particular silence that meant her mother was processing something she hadn't expected and needed a moment before she could speak again without her voice doing something she didn't want it to do. He filed a missing persons report, Mom. I saw it. Her mother's voice was flat. It's on the news. I left voluntarily. I need you to know that. I know that, Amelia. I know you. A pause. Where are you? Somewhere safe. I can't explain everything right now, but I'm safe and I'm… She stopped. She had not planned to tell her mother about the pregnancy over the phone on the third day of the rest of her life, sitting in a borrowed room in a house that belonged to a man who ran things that didn't get listed in trade publications. But her mother was 61 years old and had raised her alone after her father left, and had never once said I told you so about Marcus, even though she had thought it from the first dinner she'd attended where Marcus had corrected Amelia's story about her own childhood in front of 6 people without noticing he'd done it. She deserved the truth. I'm pregnant. The silence was longer this time. Oh, baby, her mother said finally, and those 2 words contained more information than most people convey in full conversations. The grief, the love, the specific tenderness of a woman who understood exactly what her daughter was navigating and was not going to make it worse by saying any of the things she was thinking. I'm okay, Amelia said. I'm going to be okay. I know you are. Her mother's voice steadied. Do you need me to come? Not yet. Soon. I'll call you when I can tell you more. Amelia, her mother's voice dropped slightly. Who are you with? She thought about how to answer that. Someone who is helping me, she said. Someone I think I can trust. Another pause, and then her mother said something that surprised her. Trust your gut. You always had good instincts. You just spent 3 years letting someone else override them. After she hung up, she sat with that for a while. Elena Vasquez arrived at the estate at 2 in the afternoon with a second attorney and a paralegal, and they set up in the dining room with laptops and document folders and the organized focus of people who understood that time was a resource being consumed by both sides simultaneously. Amelia sat across from Elena, and they worked for 4 hours straight. Not just the divorce filing, but the detailed reconstruction of everything Amelia had witnessed, attended, heard, and handled during 3 years inside Marcus's world. It was more than she'd expected. When she began speaking, she thought she had fragments, impressions, moments, things that had seemed like nothing at the time because Marcus had trained her, through repetition and subtle condescension, to distrust the significance of her own observations. But when Elena asked questions and she answered them, and the paralegal recorded the answers and the answers connected to each other, she discovered that she had not been witness to fragments at all. She had been witness to a great deal. The investor dinners where Marcus described projects that she now understood didn't exist in the form he was presenting them. The weekend in March, 18 months ago, when Marcus had come home at 4 in the morning and told her the deal in Philadelphia had closed and he'd needed to celebrate with the team, and she had nodded and not said anything because she was already fluent in the language of don't push, don't question, don't make him feel accused. She knew now that the Philadelphia project had never closed. It had never been real in the way Marcus described it. She had been sitting in the same room as the lie, and she had absorbed it without knowing what it was. "You couldn't have known," Elena said, when Amelia said something to this effect. "I should have pushed harder," Amelia said. "He made sure you wouldn't," Elena said. "That's not a character flaw. That's the result of a deliberate strategy applied over years." Amelia thought about what Dante had said. "You're just the first one who left before he could finish the process." And she pressed her pen against the notepad harder than she needed to and kept going. By 6 o'clock, they had 40 pages of documented recollections. Elena said it was more than she'd hoped for. Amelia didn't feel triumphant about it. She felt wrung out in the specific way of someone who has spent 4 hours excavating their own recent past and finding, in the excavation, things they'd buried without knowing they were burying them. The call came at 7:42 that evening. She was in the kitchen eating something Rosa had left covered on the stove when Dante appeared in the doorway. His expression was the controlled version of something she hadn't seen on him before, and she recognized it from the way she'd learned to read Marcus. The face a man makes when he knows something is about to change the temperature of a room and he's deciding how to introduce it. "What happened?" she said. It wasn't a question. He came in and sat across from her at the table. He was carrying a tablet and he set it face down, which meant whatever was on it was something he wanted to frame before she saw. "Marcus held a press conference an hour ago," Dante said. She put down her fork. "He didn't file the missing persons report as a quiet administrative move," Dante said. "He held a press conference. Full cameras. He read a prepared statement about his concern for you, about the pregnancy. Yes, he mentioned the pregnancy. And he described you as having experienced a mental health crisis that he had been privately managing and supporting for the past 18 months. The kitchen was very still. "He mentioned the pregnancy," she said. "He framed it as part of the context, that you had received the news and that it had—" Dante paused. He used the phrase destabilized her significantly. She picked up the tablet herself and turned it over and pressed play. Marcus was standing at a podium in the lobby of his corporate headquarters. He was wearing a charcoal suit and no tie, which was a calculated choice, formal enough to communicate gravity, casual enough to suggest a man too distressed to think about appearances. She had seen him dressed like this before. It was his "I'm being human" for the camera's configuration. "Amelia has been struggling," he said to the assembled reporters. His voice weighted with the specific texture of a man bravely holding himself together. "I should have done more. I blame myself for not being present enough in the last several months." When she found out about the pregnancy, the news, which should have been a joy for both of us, seems to have triggered something I wasn't equipped to handle on my own. I'm asking anyone who has seen her to please reach out. She's not well. She needs support. She needs to come home. She put the tablet down. She was breathing. She was doing it carefully and deliberately, through her nose, because if she let herself breathe normally right now, something would come out of her that she couldn't take back. "He told the world I'm mentally ill," she said. "He told the world a story," Dante said. "A very specific story designed to— I know what it's designed to do." She stood up from the table. She couldn't sit still. She moved to the other side of the kitchen and pressed her palms flat on the counter and looked at the wall. "Anything I say now looks like denial. Anything I do looks like erratic behavior. If I come out publicly and say he's lying, I'm the unstable woman proving she's unstable by lashing out at her concerned husband." She pressed harder against the counter. "He's been planning this. This is not reactive. This is not a scared man making mistakes. He planned this before I left. Dante was quiet. He planned it before I left, she said again, and this time the words had more weight because she understood what they meant. That Marcus had not been blindsided by her departure. That the missing persons report, the press conference, the framing of her as fragile and unwell, this was not improvisation. This was a prepared response to a scenario he had anticipated. He thought you might leave, Dante said. He had a contingency. She turned around. How long have you known he had a contingency? Dante held her gaze. I suspected it when he moved as fast as he did. I confirmed it 2 hours ago. 2 hours ago. She absorbed this. And you waited until now to tell me. You were in the middle of 4 hours of testimony that we needed, Dante said. I made a judgment call. The room between them felt like something with temperature. Don't do that again, she said. I understand. I mean it. Don't filter information from me because you're managing my focus. I am not something to be managed. She said it evenly, without heat, which was somehow more serious than anger would have been. If I'm in this, I'm in it with everything. All of it. Even the parts you think will distract me. Agreed, Dante said. Sit down. There's more. She sat down. The more was this. Carver, the private investigator Marcus kept on retainer, had been running surveillance on Dante's estate since approximately noon that day. Not covertly, not particularly. Marcus either wanted Dante to know he was watching, or he was arrogant enough to think his PI was more discreet than he was. Either interpretation was useful, but for different reasons. This meant Marcus knew she was here. Not in a building, not in a city. Here. This specific address. Which meant either the car had been tracked from the moment it left the penthouse, or Marcus had resources Dante hadn't fully mapped yet, or both. He knows I'm with you, she said. Yes. Does he know who you are? Dante's expression gave her the answer before he spoke. Marcus and I are not strangers, he said. We've never been in the same room, but we've operated in adjacent spaces for long enough that my name is not unknown to him. She stared at him. You didn't tell me that. No. When you gave me your card at the restaurant, I didn't know you were Marcus Hale's wife when you walked in, Dante said. I knew within about 20 minutes of the conversation. I gave you the card after I knew. She sat very still. She was doing the math. You gave me the card because you knew who I was. I gave you the card because you were a woman who was going to walk back into a bad situation, and I thought you deserved another option, Dante said. Both things can be true at the same time. That is exactly the kind of answer someone gives when they want you to stop asking the question, she said. It is also, he said, the true answer. She looked at him for a long time. She was very good at this, at holding a look without flinching, at making the silence do the work of the question, which was something she had learned not from sophistication, but from years of marriage to a man who used silence strategically, and she had eventually learned to use it back. Is helping me part of a larger strategy against Marcus? Dante leaned forward slightly. Yes, he said. And no. What I told you is also true. You are not collateral in something I'm running. But I would be lying to you if I said that Marcus Hale collapsing as a result of a federal investigation was something I was going to be sorry about. Why? A long pause. The longest she had heard from him. Because 3 years ago, Marcus used his network to pressure a financial institution into withdrawing support from a legitimate business I was building. A clean business, nothing to do with the other things I do. He did it because I moved into a development space he'd marked as his territory, and he wanted me gone. He didn't do it to me directly. He did it through proxies, in a way that couldn't be traced, and the business failed because of it, and 240 people lost their jobs. He said this without drama, which was what made it land. I've been patient about Marcus Hale for a long time. You walking into my restaurant was not something I engineered, but I would be dishonest if I told you that helping you has nothing to do with what I've wanted for 3 years. She sat with this. She pulled it apart and looked at the components of it, the honesty of it, the way he had not tried to make it sound cleaner than it was. Does this change anything? He asked. She thought about the press conference. Marcus at the podium with his no-tie suit and his prepared grief, calling her unwell in front of cameras, using her pregnancy as evidence of her fragility, building a public record that would make anything she said look like the word of a woman who could not be trusted. No, she said, but I needed to know it. The next 72 hours moved in a rhythm that felt nothing like the 72 hours Dante had described when she agreed to wait. What he had described was a strategic pause. What she experienced was closer to siege. Marcus's attorney moved to freeze every joint asset the following morning, which Elena had anticipated and partially countered, but the speed of it meant that 3 accounts Amelia had nominally shared access to were inaccessible by 9 a.m. Her personal credit card, the one in her name, not linked to his primary accounts, declined when Rosa attempted to purchase something routine. Someone had gotten to it. "He can't legally do that," Elena said on the phone. "He did it anyway," Amelia said. "We'll have it reversed within 24 hours. It's legal," Amelia said. "He's doing it to send a message, to tell me that I'm already isolated, that everything I thought I had access to is actually his, that without him I'm standing in borrowed clothes in someone else's house with no money and a baby and nothing else." Elena was quiet for a moment. "That's probably accurate." "I know it's accurate. He's been doing it for 3 years, just not this openly." The second thing that happened was worse. Dante's attorney received a filing indicating that Marcus intended to contest the divorce on grounds of his wife's mental incapacity, specifically arguing that Amelia was not in a competent state to have initiated legal proceedings, and that any documents she had signed or statements she had given should be considered potentially invalid. Amelia read the filing sitting at the dining room table and felt something that was not quite nausea and not quite rage, but had the physical weight of both. I was trying to legally erase her agency. He was attempting to construct, in court documents, a version of her that could not make her own decisions, so that the testimony she had given Elena, the divorce she had filed, the cooperation she had offered to federal investigators, could all be challenged as the actions of a woman who wasn't well enough to know what she was doing. "Can he do this?" she asked Elena. "He can try," Elena said. "He won't succeed. The standard for mental incapacity is extremely high, and nothing in your documented medical history supports." "He'll manufacture it," Amelia said. "He has doctors. He knows people. He's been telling the press for 4 days that I've been struggling. He's been building the record." Elena paused. "Yes, that's the concern. So what do we do?" "We get our own evaluation. We get it done quickly by a credentialed independent party, and we file it in opposition before he can establish the narrative as fact." "How quickly?" "I can have someone here tomorrow morning." "Set it up," Amelia said. She hung up and sat at the table and pressed her fingers against her eyes. She was 8 weeks pregnant, and she hadn't slept more than 5 hours in any of the last 4 nights, and her husband was attempting to legally declare her incompetent in a filing that would be public record, and her photograph was circulating in news coverage that described her as a missing woman in mental health crisis, and the bank account her grandmother had left her was frozen. She sat like that for 2 minutes. Exactly 2 minutes, because she had learned long ago that she could allow herself 2 minutes of something before it started to cost her more than she could afford. Then she took her hands from her eyes and looked at the wall and thought very clearly, "What do I know that he doesn't know I know?" The answer came to her in the middle of that night, at 2 in the morning, sitting at the window of her room, watching the trees in the dark. Patricia Dunmore. Marcus had mentioned her once, not by name, not as a person, but in the oblique way he sometimes referenced things he considered resolved, the particular dismissiveness of a man describing something he'd put away and locked. 18 months into their marriage, he had said something about a woman who had tried to make difficulties after a relationship ended, and had described dealing with it as a tedious but necessary part of moving on. And Amelia had not asked questions because she was still in the phase of their marriage where she chose comfort over information. Patricia Dunmore had signed an NDA. Dante had said so. But NDAs had limits. NDAs could be challenged if the agreement had been signed under duress, or if the subject matter involved criminal activity, or if the person who'd signed it was prepared to accept the legal cost of breaking it in a context where the public interest argument was strong enough. A federal investigation might be exactly that context. She went to find Dante at 2:15 in the morning. He was awake. He was in the office, which she was starting to understand was where he existed when other people slept. The kind of man whose mind ran on a schedule that didn't map neatly onto conventional hours. He looked up when she appeared in the doorway, and he did not ask why she was awake, because he already knew, or if he didn't know specifically, he understood that she was the kind of person who processes things in the dark, because the dark was the only place that didn't require her to manage how she appeared while doing it. Patricia Dunmore, she said. Can she break the NDA if the investigation goes federal? Dante set down what he was reading. Possibly. If her attorney can make a public interest argument, and if the federal investigators subpoena her, the NDA becomes significantly harder to enforce. Has anyone contacted her? Not yet. Why not? Because until today I wasn't sure the federal piece was moving fast enough to make it viable, he said. That changed about an hour ago. I had a conversation with my contact at Financial Crimes. They've accelerated the timeline. Something broke loose on their end. A witness they'd been waiting on came through. She sat down. Someone inside Marcus's operation. Yes. Who? Dante was quiet for just a moment. An executive named Daniel Reeves. He's been with Marcus's company for 9 years. He's been cooperating quietly with investigators for about 4 months. Tonight, he agreed to go on record. She thought about the name. She had met Daniel Reeves at a dinner. I was quiet, competent, the kind of man who made himself useful and invisible simultaneously. He had poured her a glass of water once and told her she had a beautiful laugh, which had struck her at the time as an oddly specific thing to say in the middle of a dinner about investment returns. He's going to testify, she said. If he doesn't lose his nerve, Dante said. Which is the variable. Marcus will find out someone inside has flipped. He always does. And when he does, the pressure he puts on Reeves will be a sound from somewhere in the house interrupted him. Not loud, just wrong. The particular wrongness of a sound that shouldn't be there at 2 a.m. in a house where the staff didn't move around after midnight. Dante was on his feet before she'd fully registered it. The speed was something she noted. Not the performance of readiness, but the actual thing. The instant reconfiguration of a body that has been trained to respond to exactly this kind of signal. Stay here, he said. What? Amelia. His voice had a quality she hadn't heard in it before. Not fear. The absolute opposite of fear, which was its own kind of unsettling. Stay in this room and don't open the door until I come back. He left. She sat in the office and she listened to the house, and her heartbeat was very loud. And she counted automatically, the way she had counted since she was a child when something frightened her. The old trick of giving her mind a number to hold, so it didn't fill with the things it wanted to fill with. She counted to 47 before Dante came back. He came in and closed the door, and his expression had closed in a way she hadn't seen before. And there was something in his right hand that he moved behind his back when he saw her looking, but she had already seen it. What was that? She said. Someone was on the property, he said. Was it? Not Marcus. Not one of his people. Someone else. He came to the desk and sat down and picked up his phone, and the conversation he had in the next 90 seconds was in Italian and low and fast, and she caught almost none of it, but she watched his face, and what she saw there told her something was wrong at a level that had nothing to do with Marcus Hale. He put the phone down. Tell me, she said. He looked at her, and for the first time since she had walked into his restaurant soaking wet with a pregnancy test in her pocket, she saw something on his face that was not fully controlled. Not panic, but the edge of something that a man like Dante Moretti would only show when the situation had moved into territory where control was no longer the primary operating principle. Marcus made a call 4 days ago, Dante said. The 4th call he made the morning after you left. I told you I didn't know who it was. I know now. She waited. There's a man named Victor Solak, Dante said. He operates primarily in Eastern Europe, but he has interests here. Marcus has used him before, not directly, always through layers, when he needed something that his legitimate network couldn't handle. The room was very cold, or she had become cold, one of the two. What does Victor Solak do? She said, though she understood the general shape of the answer. He resolves problems, Dante said, in the flattest possible way. People problems, the kind that legal strategy and PR campaigns can't fix. She was very still. Marcus called someone who hurts people. Marcus called someone who makes people disappear in a way that looks like anything other than what it is, Dante said. Mental health crisis, voluntary disappearance, a woman who walked away from her life and couldn't be found. He paused. The missing persons report wasn't just PR, it was groundwork. The silence in the room was extraordinary. She thought about the voicemail. Come home so we can handle this the right way. She had understood handle to mean manage, control, negotiate. She understood now that she had not understood it correctly at all, and the specific horror of that misunderstanding moved through her body from the top of her skull to the soles of her feet in about 3 seconds. He was going to... She couldn't finish the sentence. I was going to make sure that when you disappeared, there was already a public record explaining why, Dante said. The unstable wife, the pregnancy that destabilized her, the husband who tried everything, the woman who was last seen walking into the rain. She pressed her hand against her mouth. Not dramatically, just to hold something in place. How long have you known this was possible? She said, from behind her hand. I suspected it when he made the 4th call, Dante said. I've been operating on that assumption since the first night. That's why the car was already waiting. Yes. That's why you answered in one ring. Yes. She took her hand from her mouth. She breathed. She was doing it by force of will at this point, managing the mechanics of her own respiration, because the automatic function had become unreliable. What happens now? Now the situation has changed, Dante said. Solak's man on the property tonight was reconnaissance. I wasn't here to do anything yet. He was mapping the layout, the security, the access points, which means we have time, but not a great deal of it. How much time? Days, not weeks. She looked at him. She was looking at him the way you look at something when you're deciding how much of your life to put in its hands. And the calculation was different than any calculation she had made before, because the variables were different. This was not about trust in the abstract. This was not about whether a man's word was reliable in the ordinary sense. This was something more fundamental. What do you need from me? She said. I need you to do something that is going to feel like the opposite of what every instinct you have is telling you to do right now, Dante said. What is it? I need you to let me move you somewhere that Marcus cannot find, he said, off the grid, completely. For as long as it takes for the federal case to move fast enough that Marcus is too busy saving himself to allocate resources to anything else. Which means no phone calls, no contact with anyone who Marcus can pressure, no digital footprint at all. She stared at him. You want me to actually disappear? Temporarily. You want me to become the missing woman he told everyone I was. I want you to become a woman he cannot find until it's too late for him to do anything with that information, Dante said. There's a difference. She pressed her fingers against the table. She thought about her mother, about Elena. About the testimony she'd given, the pages of it, the careful reconstruction of 3 years of witnessed deception. She thought about Daniel Reeves, somewhere in the city right now, having agreed to testify, probably lying awake the same way she had been lying awake, running the numbers on what courage was going to cost. She thought about the child, not abstractly, not as a concept, but specifically, the 8-week-old fact of it, the body inside her body that had not asked for any of this, and whose entire future was, for the next several months at least, physically and completely inseparable from her own. She had promised. In the back of a car, at midnight, to someone who couldn't hear her yet, she had made one promise. If I disappear, she said slowly, Marcus thinks he's winning. For a short time, yes. And that makes him careless. Dante looked at her. Yes, he said. A man who thinks he's already won stops watching the details. And the details are where your people are already working. Yes. She sat with this. She turned it over completely, looking for the angle she was missing, the place where her cooperation in her own temporary erasure became something she couldn't walk back from. She was very thorough about it. She had learned in the last week that she was much more thorough than she had been given room to be. She found the angle. If something happens to you while I'm off the grid, she said, I have no way to know. I have no way to do anything. I would be completely dependent on a network I can't see and can't verify. That's true, Dante said. That's not a small thing. No, he said. It's not. I'm asking you to trust something that hasn't been fully earned yet. She looked at him for a long moment. A man who kept his word, Rosa had said. In the world he operates in, that is not a small thing. She thought about the alternative. She thought about what disappear meant in Solak's vocabulary versus what it meant in Dante's. And the distinction between those two meanings was the entire content of the choice in front of her. She was not the woman she had been 10 days ago. That woman would have needed more time, more certainty, more guarantee before she moved. She would have waited for conditions that felt safe enough, and the waiting would have killed her. I need 48 hours, she said, not to decide, I've decided, but I need 48 hours to finish what I started with Elena. There's information in my head that isn't on paper yet, and if something goes wrong before I'm done, it goes with me. Dante looked at her steadily. 48 hours, he said. After that, we move. She nodded. She stood up from the chair and her legs held her, which was something she made note of, the body's basic competence in the middle of its own terror. She walked to the door of the office, and then she stopped, because there was one more thing. Dante. She didn't turn around. Yes. When this is over, she said, and Marcus is done, and the federal case is closed, and I am on the other side of whatever the next weeks are, I need you to understand that I am going to be a different person than I am right now. Not better, not worse. Different. And I need whatever this is between us to be able to accommodate that. A long pause. I'm counting on it, he said quietly. She walked out of the office and down the hall, and she did not go back to her room. She went to the dining room and she turned on a lamp, and she pulled Elena's notepad toward her and she started writing, by hand, in the particular focused handwriting she defaulted to under pressure. Small, precise, leaning slightly left. Everything she still remembered that hadn't made it to paper. She wrote for 3 hours without stopping. Outside, the dark held whatever it was holding. Somewhere in the city, Marcus Hale was sleeping, or not sleeping, inside the story he had constructed about a woman who had fallen apart and needed to be found. Somewhere Daniel Reeves was deciding whether his courage was going to last through morning. Somewhere, a man named Victor Solak was receiving a report about the layout of a house and the location of its exits. And in a room with a single lamp and a borrowed notepad, Amelia Carter, not Mrs. Hale, not the missing woman, not the unstable wife, was becoming something that none of them, not Marcus, not Solak, not even Dante entirely, had yet accounted for. She was becoming someone who knew exactly what she was doing. She finished writing at 5:14 in the morning. Her hand ached from the wrist up, and the notepad had expanded from Elena's 40 pages to 61, the last several written in a slightly less controlled hand because exhaustion had gotten into the fine motor precision around hour 2, but hadn't touched the content, which was the part that mattered. She set the pen down and flexed her fingers and looked at what she'd produced, and felt the specific satisfaction of someone who has extracted everything useful from a situation before the situation closes around them. Rosa appeared at 5:30 with coffee, which meant Rosa had been awake or had not slept, one of the two, and that the house operated on a kind of vigilance that didn't require announcement. "You should eat something," Rosa said. "In a minute." Rosa set the coffee down and looked at the notepad, and then at Amelia with the expression of a woman who had seen a great many things in 23 years and had learned to recognize the particular quality of someone who has passed through a threshold in the night that they will not be passing back through. "He's going to come after you," Rosa said, not gently, just as fact. "I know. Not the lawyers. Him. I know that too." Rosa nodded once, slowly, and left. Elena arrived at 7 with the independent psychiatric evaluator Dante had arranged. A woman named Dr. Sandra Okafor, who was 60, carried herself with the dense authority of someone who had spent decades not being impressed by attempts to manipulate her professional conclusions, and who conducted the evaluation with the efficient precision of a person who understood exactly what it was being used for and intended to make it bulletproof. The evaluation took 90 minutes. Dr. Okafor asked questions that were sometimes clinical and sometimes disarmingly personal, and Amelia answered all of them with the same quality she had brought to the notepad the night before: complete, direct, nothing softened or managed. When it was over, Dr. Okafor sat back and said, "Mrs. Hale." "Carter," Amelia said. "Amelia Carter." Dr. Okafor accepted this without comment. "Ms. Carter. You are one of the most cognitively coherent and emotionally self-aware individuals I have evaluated in a high-stress context in 20 years of practice. Anyone who attempts to argue otherwise in a legal proceeding is going to have a very difficult morning." Amelia looked at her. "Will you say that on paper?" "I already have," Dr. Okafor said, and produced a sealed envelope from her bag. The 48 hours collapsed faster than time usually moved. Dante's people were preparing something she wasn't fully briefed on, which she had agreed to. Information on a need-to-know basis for the operational elements, full transparency on anything that affected her directly. It was a negotiated arrangement, and it held, mostly, except for the moments when she caught the tone of conversations that stopped when she entered rooms and had to actively resist the impulse to push. She called her mother once more. Brief. She said she was going somewhere and wouldn't be reachable, and she was safe, and she would explain everything when she could. Her mother said 3 words. I trust you. That was all. Amelia held the phone for a moment after the call ended and then put it on the table and walked away from it, because what was coming required her to be unreachable by anyone who loved her, and the only way to do that without losing herself to guilt was to move fast enough that sentiment couldn't keep up. Elena filed the evaluation. Filed it loudly, not just with the court, but with 3 legal journalists who covered family law and 1 investigative reporter who had been nosing around the edges of Marcus's financial world for 2 years without enough to print. The filing contained Dr. Okafor's conclusions and a counter-motion to every action Marcus's attorneys had taken in the previous 4 days, drafted in the specific legal language that meant, "We are not afraid of you, and we have more ammunition than you have seen yet." Marcus's response came within 6 hours. It came not through his attorneys, but through the press, which was itself a message. When you stop talking to the lawyers and start talking to cameras, you are no longer operating in a space where rules apply. He gave a second statement. This one was different from the first. The grieving husband had hardened into something more aggressive. He described Amelia as being under the influence of parties with unknown motivations, suggested that people were exploiting her fragile state for their own purposes, and used the phrase criminal elements without naming names, which was legally safe and practically devastating because it planted exactly the image he wanted without giving Dante grounds for defamation. Amelia watched the clip on Dante's tablet standing in the hallway, and she felt her jaw tighten with a force that was almost physical pain. "He's talking about you," she said to Dante, who was standing beside her. "He's talking about me without saying my name," Dante said, "which is what he does. He's going to say it soon." "Yes," Dante said. "When he does, it becomes something we can use." She handed him the tablet. "The 48 hours is up in 4 hours," she said. "I know. Are we ready?" He looked at her. "Are you?" They moved her at 11 that night. Not dramatically, no convoy, no visible security beyond 2 men in a car ahead and 1 vehicle following, all of it unremarkable on a highway in the dark. She sat in the back seat with a bag Rosa had packed for her and the 61 pages of handwritten notes sealed in an envelope addressed to Elena, which had been couriered at 9 p.m. and confirmed received at 9:47. She had left the phone. She was carrying nothing with a signal. The car took her north, then west, and then onto roads that required no particular familiarity with the landscape to recognize as deliberately indirect, the route of people who check their mirrors more than twice. She watched the darkness out the window, and she was not afraid in the way she had expected to be afraid. She was afraid in a different way, the way that feels less like panic and more like altitude, the sensation of being higher above the ground than you are accustomed to. She was also, beneath the fear, something she hadn't been in a long time. Ready. The location was a house in a small town 2 hours from the city whose name she wasn't given. It belonged to someone in Dante's network, a woman who lived there half the year and was currently elsewhere, and who had offered the space with the complete understanding of what it was being offered for. The house was ordinary in every external way, which was the point. A man named Caruso met them at the door. 50s, broad, the face of someone who had spent a career making himself easy to underestimate. He was there to manage the security perimeter, which he described in the fewest possible words. And then he left her alone with 2 people she hadn't met before. A woman named Tess, who handled communications, and a younger man named Park, who managed the technical side of whatever the technical side was. Dante had not come with her. He had told her this in the car, 30 minutes before they arrived, and she had taken it with the forced steadiness of someone who understood the logic and resented the necessity simultaneously. "I need to be in the city for what happens next," he'd said. "What I'm doing in the next 48 hours requires me to be physically present in places I can't be if I'm here." "What happens in the next 48 hours?" she'd asked. "Daniel Reeves testifies to federal investigators tomorrow morning," Dante said. "I have a meeting with my contact at Financial Crimes the same afternoon. And Marcus—" He stopped. Marcus is going to make a move, something direct. He's been building toward it, and the pressure is high enough now that he can't maintain the indirect approach much longer. What kind of move? I don't know exactly, Dante said, which is why I need to be where I can see it coming. She had looked out the car window. If something happens to you, Caruso has instructions, he said, and Tess can reach Elena in any scenario. That's not what I meant. A pause. I know, he said. Nothing is going to happen to me. You can't promise that. No, he said. I can't. She had not said anything else. She had watched the darkness until the car stopped. And then she had gotten out and walked into the ordinary house in the unnamed town and started the process of waiting, which was the hardest thing she had ever agreed to do. The first 18 hours were almost manageable. Tess gave her updates at intervals. Daniel Reeves's testimony had proceeded, had lasted 4 hours, had apparently been detailed enough that 2 investigators who had been working the case for 2 years had visibly reacted to things they were hearing for the first time. Elena called through a secured line at 2 in the afternoon and said the psychiatric evaluation had been entered into the record and Marcus's mental incapacity motion had been challenged formally, and the judge's preliminary response had not been favorable to Marcus's position. Small victories, the kind that meant the scaffolding was holding. Then at 4:07 in the afternoon of the second day, Tess appeared in the doorway of the room Amelia was using, and her expression had the particular quality of someone carrying information they wish they didn't have. What? Amelia said. Reeves, Tess said. He withdrew. She went very still. What do you mean he withdrew? He contacted his attorney at noon and told them he was recanting his cooperation. He issued a statement through his lawyer saying that he had provided information under duress and that his previous statements should not be considered reliable. Tess paused. He's out. The room was very quiet. Marcus got to him, Amelia said. Or Solak did, Tess said. We don't know which. Does it matter? Tess didn't answer because the answer was no. It didn't. The effect was the same. Amelia stood up. She moved to the window and looked at the unremarkable street outside the ordinary house, and she did the inventory that she had been doing every time something collapsed. What is still standing? What can still be used? What is the load-bearing element of this structure, and is it intact? The financial documents, she said. The shell companies, the accounts, none of that depended on Reeves. No, Tess said. But he was the inside witness. He was the person who could speak to intent, who could testify that Marcus knew what he was doing was fraudulent, not just that the documentation suggests it. Without him, the case becomes significantly harder to prove beyond the financial record alone. How significantly harder? Tess was quiet for a moment. My understanding is that investigators were counting on Reeves to be the human element. Numbers can be explained away. Testimony about explicit, deliberate intent is harder to counter. Amelia pressed her hand flat against the wall. What about Patricia Dunmore? Elena's team reached out yesterday, Tess said. Her attorney has not responded. She stood at the window and she thought, with a clarity that exhaustion sometimes produces when it burns through everything else and leaves only the essential structure, about Marcus standing at a podium in a charcoal suit saying she's not well, she needs to come home, and about a pregnancy test in a coat pocket in a restaurant with faded gold letters and a man who answered his phone in one ring, and about 61 pages in an envelope that Elena had confirmed received, but that were now, without Reeves, one significant pillar short of what they needed. I need to talk to Dante, she said. He's in a meeting. I need to talk to Dante now. The call lasted 8 minutes. She told him about Reeves in the first 30 seconds because he already knew. She could hear it in the way he said her name when he picked up. The controlled quality of a man who is managing his own reaction to something that has already happened. What do we do? She said. We don't panic, he said. I'm not panicking. I'm asking you a direct question. Patricia Dunmore, he said. Her attorney's silence is not a no. It's a calculation. Her attorney is waiting to see how the federal case shapes up before they risk advising her to break an NDA that still has financial teeth. If we can show them that the case is moving forward without Reeves, is it? She said. Without him, is it actually moving forward? A pause that was half a second too long. Tell me the truth, she said. It's moving, Dante said. More slowly. The investigators are regrouping. They're not abandoning it. But the timeline has extended. How extended? Weeks. possibly months. She pressed her eyes shut. Solak, she said. His people were at the estate. They're going to find this house eventually. We have time. You keep saying that. Because it's still true. Dante. She said his name with the full weight of everything she was feeling, which was considerable. I am in an unknown house with people I don't know, and my phone doesn't work, and my husband is telling national television that I'm having a breakdown, and the one person who could have ended this in weeks just disappeared, and I need you to be completely honest with me about where we actually are. A longer pause. She heard him breathe. We're in a harder position than we were 48 hours ago, he said. Reeves was important. We'll find another way in, but it's going to take longer, and the pressure in the meantime is going to be significant. Marcus is going to escalate, yes. And Solak, I'm handling Solak, Dante said, in the specific tone of someone who means that phrase differently than it sounds in an ordinary context. What does that mean? It means you don't need to worry about Solak, he said. It means that particular problem is being addressed in a way that doesn't involve you. She understood what he was not saying. She stood with it for a moment, the weight of what handling Solak meant for a man like Dante, the world that phrase opened onto, and she made the deliberate choice that she had been making by increments since she walked out of the penthouse, to stay inside the decision she had made and not flinch from the full shape of what it contained. Okay, she said. I'll be there tonight, he said. You don't have to. I'll be there tonight, he said again, and the repetition was not insistence. It was something else. She hung up. He arrived at 9:47. She heard the car, and then his voice in the hallway speaking to Caruso. And then he appeared in the doorway of the room she was in, and he looked like a man who had been in 3 cities in 2 days without enough sleep, which was because he had been. She looked at him, and she did not say anything immediately, because she had spent the afternoon moving through the full emotional register of the situation and had arrived somewhere on the other side of it that was quieter and more functional, and what she needed from him right now was not comfort. Sit down, she said. Tell me everything you know about Patricia Dunmore's NDA. Specifically, the exact grounds on which it was signed, the terms that might be challengeable, and what it would take to get her in front of a federal subpoena. He sat down. He told her. They worked through the night. At 6 in the morning, Tess knocked. Elena's on the line, she said. You need to hear this. Amelia picked up. Marcus held another press conference at midnight, Elena said. Her voice was controlled but had a wire through it. He named Dante. She looked at Dante. Named him how? Named him as a person of criminal interest who has been exploiting his wife's vulnerable state, Elena said. He used the phrase organized crime specifically. He's filed a motion claiming that you are being held against your will by a known criminal and that your legal filings are being generated under coercion. The room was completely silent. He's trying to get law enforcement to come after Dante, Amelia said. He's trying to accomplish 2 things simultaneously, Elena said. Destroy your credibility as a witness and eliminate Dante as an operational threat. If law enforcement starts investigating Dante on these grounds, his attention goes there instead of toward the federal financial case. Can he make it stick? Amelia asked. The coercion claim? Elena said. No, not with Dr. Okafor's evaluation on record and your own testimony. But the criminal association claim. She stopped. What? Amelia said. Dante needs to know that Marcus gave investigators a specific file this morning, a federal file, not financial crimes, the other kind. Amelia looked at Dante. He had heard the entire conversation. His face was doing the controlled thing, but something underneath it had shifted. How specific, Dante said, loud enough for the phone. Specific enough that I strongly advise you to speak to your own attorney in the next hour, Elena said. Amelia kept her eyes on Dante's face. She watched him process it, the file, whatever was in it, the years of things that don't get listed in trade publications suddenly being handed to federal investigators by a man who was cornered and had decided that if he was going down, he was going to take the walls with him. Marcus had just made the fight personal in a different direction. He's not trying to win the divorce anymore, Amelia said. No, Elena agreed. He's trying to survive. And he's calculated that the best way to do that is to generate enough legal noise around everyone near him that the financial investigation gets buried under everything else. Amelia put the phone down slowly. She looked at Dante. His jaw was set. His hands were flat on the table. He was breathing with the deliberate steadiness of a man who is deciding something, and the decision was visible in the exact quality of his stillness, the way a body holds itself differently when it has arrived at a point past which ordinary caution stops being the operative principle. "This changes things for you," she said. "Yes," he said. "How much?" He looked at her directly. "Enough that the next move needs to be faster than I planned and more direct." "What's the move?" He was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that preceded the kind of honesty that has decided it doesn't have the luxury of being managed anymore. "There is a man," Dante said, "who has been in Marcus's organization for 11 years. Not an executive, not someone with a name in the press. He handles the things that Marcus cannot assign to anyone with a legitimate identity. His name is not important right now. What is important is that 3 years ago I did something for this man that he has never repaid." Amelia waited. "I protected someone he loved," Dante said simply. "He has owed me something significant ever since, and he has been waiting for me to name the price." "You want to call in the debt," she said. "It would give us something we don't have right now," Dante said. "It would give us the one piece of physical evidence that no financial document can replicate, the communication between Marcus and Victor Solak, the actual record of what Marcus commissioned." The air in the room changed. "That's not just divorce leverage," she said. "That's a criminal conspiracy charge." "Yes," Dante said. "That's Marcus in prison." "Yes." She stood up from the table. She walked to the window. Outside, the ordinary street was doing its ordinary morning thing. A neighbor with a dog, a car pulling out of a driveway, the unremarkable rhythms of a place that had no idea what was being decided inside one of its houses. She thought about what she was agreeing to. She pulled it apart with the same thoroughness she had applied to everything else. The man with the debt, the communication record, the conspiracy charge, the chain of events that would follow if the record was real and was delivered and was usable. She thought about Marcus at a podium calling her unstable. She thought about Reeves in an office somewhere, probably shaking, having just recanted everything he'd said under pressure from people who hurt people when other methods stopped being efficient. She thought about Patricia Dunmore and the NDA she'd signed in exchange for a settlement, the price of her silence, the amount Marcus had determined her story was worth, and the particular cruelty of being assigned a dollar value and told to disappear. She turned around. "Make the call," she said. Dante looked at her for a moment. Just a moment, not long, and she saw in that look the thing she had been learning to read in him over days of pressure, which was that he did not perform steadiness. He had it. He was looking at her from the inside of it. He picked up the phone. The call lasted 4 minutes. He spoke quietly, in a combination of English and something else, and she understood only the English parts, which were operational and brief. When he ended the call, he set the phone down and said, 24 hours. "And then?" "And then we have what we need to end this," he said. "Or we don't, and we go to war with what we have." She nodded. She sat back down. And then Tess appeared in the doorway again, for the third time that morning, and the expression on her face was different from either of the previous 2 times, and Amelia felt her stomach drop before Tess even opened her mouth. "There's a car outside," Tess said. "It's been parked 2 houses down for the last 40 minutes. Caruso's voice came from somewhere in the house, low and fast, the tone of a man who has shifted from watchfulness to action. Dante was already on his feet. "How many people?" he said to Tess. "Caruso counts 2 in the car," she said, "but there's a third on foot on the other side of the block." Amelia stood up. Her heart was hitting the inside of her ribs with a force that was almost audible. She looked at Dante, and his face had gone into the mode she had seen once before. The absolute operational opposite of fear, the thing that lives past it. "They found the house," she said. "Yes," Dante said. "How?" "That's a later question," he said. He moved toward her. "There's a room at the back of the house. Tess is going to take you there now. You stay inside it. You don't open the door unless you hear my voice, and you do not—" He stopped himself. He looked at her. His hand came up and held her face for just a moment, the palm against her jaw, not gentle but present, the touch of someone making contact before the distance opens. "You do not come out regardless of what you hear." She looked at him. She wanted to say several things. She said the one that mattered. "Come back." He didn't answer. He moved toward the front of the house. Tess took her arm and they went down the hall and into the back room, and the door closed, and Amelia stood in the dark with her hand pressed flat against the wall and her heart beat in her ears like something trying to get out, and she listened to the house around her do something she had no word for. The particular quality of a structure holding its breath while the thing it was built to hold keeps happening inside it. She counted. She went past 47 this time. She went past 100. She was at 131 when she heard the first sound that told her the men in the car had stopped being patient and had decided that whatever they were here for was worth whatever came next, and the house, the ordinary house on the ordinary street, stopped being ordinary and became the place where everything that had been building since a woman walked into the rain on her anniversary night finally broke the surface and demanded to be faced directly, without management, without narrative strategy, without the comfortable distance of lawyers and filings and carefully constructed countermoves, just the raw, undressed thing itself. And Amelia Carter stood in the dark with her back against the wall and both hands pressed flat against her stomach, and she was terrified and awake, and more fully, completely present in her own life than she had been in 3 years, and she did not make a sound, and she did not move, and she did not stop. She counted to 219 before the house went quiet. Not the quiet of resolution, the sudden, dropped quiet of aftermath, the kind that follows violence the way smoke follows fire, present and acrid and informative in ways that the event itself sometimes isn't. She stood with her back against the wall of the back room and her hands still pressed flat against her stomach, and she listened to the quality of the silence and tried to read it. Footsteps in the hallway, one set, familiar weight. Amelia, Dante's voice, through the door. She opened it. He was standing in the hallway and he was upright, which was the first thing she checked, and then she checked his face, which was tight and slightly pale in a way that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with adrenaline metabolizing into something the body didn't have a clean name for. His right hand had a cut across the knuckles that was bleeding with the unhurried persistence of a wound that isn't deep but hasn't been attended to. She looked at his hand and then at his face. "Are you hurt anywhere else?" she said. "No." "The men in the car." "Caruso is handling it," he said. "They're alive. They won't be a problem." She stepped out of the room. The hallway was intact. She walked through the house, and it was intact too. Nothing broken, nothing overturned, no evidence of what had happened except a front door that was standing slightly open and a smell in the air that she identified after a moment as the specific combination of cold outside air and the aftermath of physical confrontation, which has its own scent, sweat, and tension, and something sharp underneath. Tess was at the kitchen table with her laptop open and a phone pressed to her ear, speaking quietly and efficiently. Park was somewhere she couldn't see. Caruso was outside. "They weren't Solak's people," Dante said behind her. She turned around. "What?" "The men in the car," he said. "They weren't Solak's. They were Marcus's. Private security, the kind you hire through a firm that doesn't ask about the specifics. Carver's people, probably. Surveillance, not action. They panicked when Caruso approached the car." He paused. "Solak's people don't panic." She absorbed this. "So Solak hasn't moved yet?" "No," Dante said. "Which means either Marcus hasn't given the authorization or Solak is waiting for something." "Waiting for what?" "For Marcus to be certain you're worth the cost," Dante said. "Solak is expensive and he's careful. He doesn't move until the client is committed. My read is that Marcus is still deciding whether he can resolve this through other means." "He can't," she said. "He doesn't know that yet," Dante said. "He thinks he can still control the narrative. He thinks Reeves was enough to slow the federal case, and that if he applies enough pressure in enough directions simultaneously, something gives." She stood in the middle of the ordinary kitchen in the ordinary house and she thought about Marcus calculating, the way she had watched him calculate their entire marriage, the constant management of variables, the strategic deployment of resources, the way he treated every relationship as a position on a board. She thought about the press conference, the no-tie suit, the practiced catch in his voice. She thought about what she knew that he didn't know she knew. "Call Elena," she said. "Tell her I want to make a public statement. Today. Not through a press release, not through me, directly, on camera." Dante looked at her. "You want to go public?" "I want to end the silence," she said. "Marcus has been filling it for 2 weeks. Everything he said has been filling space that I left empty. I'm done leaving it empty. If you go public, Solak's calculation changes, Dante said. A woman who's been on camera is a different kind of risk than a woman who disappeared quietly. I know, she said. That's why I want to do it today, before Marcus decides the cost is worth it. Dante was quiet for a moment. He was still bleeding from the knuckle. He seemed to have forgotten about it entirely, which was something she was going to think about later when she had the space to think about things that weren't immediate. Okay, he said. Elena arranged it in 4 hours, which was fast enough to suggest she had been waiting for the call. The journalist was a woman named Rachel Sung, who had been covering the financial investigations adjacent to Marcus's world for 3 years. The same journalist Dante had mentioned early on, the one who had been waiting for enough to print. She was not a soft interviewer. She arrived at a neutral location Elena had arranged, a law office in a city neither of them named publicly, with a camera operator and the focused, unsentimental energy of someone who understood that what she was about to record was going to matter. Amelia sat across from her, and she did not have makeup on, and she had not slept adequately in 10 days, and she was wearing clothes Rosa had packed for her, and she looked, she knew, exactly like what she was. A woman who had been through something and was sitting on the other side of it with the evidence still visible on her face. She had decided that this was exactly right. Rachel Sung looked at her and said, "Ready?" "Yes," Amelia said. The camera went on. She talked for 2 hours and 14 minutes. She did not cry, except once, briefly, when she described finding out she was pregnant and sitting alone on a cold marble floor in a dress she had put on for an anniversary dinner that had already been over before it started. She did not perform the emotion. It arrived and she let it arrive, and then she kept talking, because the tears were not the story, they were just a moment inside it, and she had not come here to give people a moment. She had come to give them the whole thing. She talked about the financial structure, carefully, with Elena present to advise on what could be stated in full and what needed to be characterized more broadly. She talked about the investor dinners and the projects that existed primarily as vehicles, and the executives who had sat at those tables moving money in circles for the benefit of one man's offshore accounts. She talked about Patricia Dunmore by name, with Patricia Dunmore's permission, a permission that had come through at 8 that morning in a phone call that lasted 40 seconds, in which a woman she had never met said, "Say my name, tell them what he did. I've been quiet long enough," and then hung up. She talked about the missing persons report. She talked about the psychiatric incapacity motion. She talked about the night her bank card was declined and the press conference where she was described as destabilized by the news of her own pregnancy, the thing that was supposed to be joy being used as evidence of her fragility. And at the very end, Rachel Sung asked, "What do you want people to understand? Not about Marcus Hale, about you." Amelia sat with the question for a moment. "That I was not a victim waiting to be rescued," she said. "I was a woman who got very good at adjusting to conditions that were slowly getting worse, which is something people do, and it doesn't make them weak. It makes them human. The moment I stopped adjusting and started asking what I actually wanted instead of what was survivable, that was the moment things changed. Nobody gave me that moment. I found it myself, standing alone in the rain." She paused. "And I'd like anyone watching who is making the same adjustments I was making to know that the rain stops eventually, and you are more capable of surviving what comes after it than you have been told." Rachel Sung nodded once. The camera went off. The interview aired 36 hours later. In that window, 2 things happened that Dante had not predicted and Marcus had not planned for. The first was Patricia Dunmore. She did not give an interview. She did not make a public statement. What she did was contact the federal investigators directly, through her attorney, and offer to provide testimony about the specific conduct she had witnessed and had been paid to stay silent about. Conduct that overlapped in 3 significant areas with what Daniel Reeves had described before he withdrew, which meant that the inside witness problem was no longer a problem. Reeves had been one pillar, and Marcus had pulled it down. Patricia Dunmore was a different pillar, and she was standing. The second thing was a phone call Dante received at 11 o'clock the night before the interview aired, from the man with the 11-year debt. The communication he had promised, the record of what Marcus had commissioned from Victor Solak, had been delivered. It was not a physical document. It was a recording, a conversation, 9 minutes long, in which Marcus Hale authorized the removal of a problem and used enough specific language that the problem in question could not be interpreted as anything other than a person. The recording was delivered to federal investigators the same morning the interview aired. Amelia did not hear the recording. She was told it existed and what it contained, and she sat with that information in the same way she had sat with every other piece of information over the last 2 weeks, completely, without looking away from the full weight of it. Her husband had commissioned her death. He had sat in an apartment or an office or a car somewhere, and he had spoken those words into a phone and paid for them with money he had stolen from people who trusted him. She sat with it until it stopped being something that was going to break her and became something that was simply, factually, the truth. It took about 40 minutes. Then she went and ate the breakfast Rosa had made, because Rosa had come to the location with Dante and had made breakfast because that was what Rosa did, in the face of things that could not be otherwise addressed. And the scrambled eggs were good, and the coffee was hot, and she ate all of it, which was the most honest response she had to everything she was feeling. The interview aired at 7 in the evening, and by 9, the phones of every journalist who covered financial crime, family law, or organized crime had not stopped ringing. By 10, 3 of Marcus's board members had issued statements distancing themselves from his conduct. By midnight, 2 of his major investors had announced they were cooperating with federal investigators. At 2 in the morning, Marcus's attorney issued a statement saying his client was unavailable for comment, which was, in the context of everything else, almost funny. At 6 the following morning, Marcus Hale was arrested at his penthouse on the 54th floor by federal agents executing a warrant that covered financial fraud, conspiracy, and a charge whose specific legal language Amelia read 3 times before she fully absorbed it. She read it sitting in a chair by the window in the room she had been given. The trees outside were doing what trees in late October do. Most of their leaves gone, the branches showing their actual structure for the first time since spring. The thing the leaves had been dressing over now visible and plain, and in its way, more interesting than the dressed version. She read the charge one more time. She closed the document. She sat for a while. She did not feel what she had expected to feel. She had expected something like triumph, or the large and clearly defined emotion that the end of something enormous is supposed to generate. What she felt instead was quieter and more complex and harder to name. Not emptiness, not numbness, but the particular stillness of a person who has been in motion for so long that stopping feels strange in the body, the muscles not yet sure the emergency is over. Dante found her there an hour later, still in the chair, still at the window. He sat down across from her without saying anything, which she had come to understand was his version of asking how she was. He did not ask how she was because the question implied she might not know, and he had figured out early that she always knew. She just sometimes needed the space around the knowledge before she could speak it. "He's in custody," she said. "Yes." "Patricia Dunmore called me this morning," she said, "before the news." "What did she say?" "She said she was sorry it took her this long, that she had told herself the NDA was about protecting her own peace, but that it was also about being afraid, and that she had been afraid for a long time, and she was done." Amelia paused. "She also said that when she heard I was pregnant, she thought about the fact that she had been pregnant too, briefly, at the end of her time with Marcus. She lost it. She never told him." Dante was very still. "She wanted me to know that," Amelia said. "I don't entirely know why. Maybe just that I wasn't the first version of this story either. Maybe because she needed someone to know." The room was quiet. Outside the window, the trees stood in their plain October structure, stripped down to what they actually were. "What happens to Solak?" she said. "The recording is in federal hands," Dante said. "What happens to him is no longer something I need to manage." She looked at him. "And the file Marcus gave investigators? About you?" He met her eyes. "My attorneys are addressing it." "That's not an answer." "It's the most accurate answer I have right now," he said. "There are things in that file that are real, and things that are exaggerated, and things that are constructed entirely. Sorting through them takes time. My attorney is good. I'm not going to disappear into a legal proceeding." He paused. "But I'm not going to pretend there isn't a cost. There is. This is going to require attention and resources for a while." She nodded. She did not offer comfort that wasn't accurate. She did not tell him it would be fine because she did not know that. What she knew was that he had done what he said he would do and had been honest with her about the things that mattered and had called the debt in at precisely the moment it was needed, and that the cost of all of it was real and she was not going to diminish it by pretending otherwise. "I'm sorry," she said. Don't be, he said. I knew the price when I decided. When did you decide? He was quiet for a moment. When you walked into my grandmother's restaurant, he said. When I saw what you were carrying and understood that you were going to go back into it unless someone gave you a reason not to. He looked at her steadily. I didn't do it because of Marcus. I want to be completely clear about that. I did it because of you. Everything that followed, the file, the investigators, the cost, I knew it was possible, and I made the decision anyway. She looked at him for a long time. She thought about what it meant to be seen by someone who didn't need you to be anything other than what you were. She thought about Marcus seeing her intelligence and categorizing it as a risk to manage. She thought about Dante seeing her standing wet and exhausted in a doorway, and deciding, in that moment, that she was worth the full price of whatever it cost to give her a different option. She did not say any of this, because she had learned that some things express themselves more honestly in what you didn't say than in what you did. I need to find somewhere to live, she said. Something moved in his face. Yes. Not here, she said. Not in your house. I need to find a place that's mine, that I chose and I'm paying for, and I know the address of because I decided on it, not because someone put me there for safety reasons. I understand, he said. And the baby, she said. I'm going to need… She stopped. She pressed one hand against her stomach, which she did more frequently now, not anxiously, but the way you maintain contact with something you are responsible for, the physical habit of accountability. I'm going to need things I've never needed before. I'm going to be afraid in ways I haven't been afraid of yet, and I'm going to figure it out, and it's not going to be graceful, and I'm not going to perform competence while I do it. Good, Dante said. I'm not asking for anything, she said. I'm telling you who I am so you understand what this looks like. I know who you are, he said. I've known since the restaurant. She looked at him. You knew me for 2 hours. I knew enough, he said simply. The rest I've been learning since. Elena called at noon with the formal update. The charges had been processed, the arraignment was set, and bail had been denied on the grounds of flight risk given the offshore financial structure. Marcus Hale was going to remain in federal custody pending trial, which meant he was not going to be standing at any more podiums in charcoal suits for the foreseeable future. The mental incapacity motion had been withdrawn by his own attorneys, who had apparently decided, in the light of the arrest and the interview and Patricia Dunmore's cooperation, that continuing to argue that Amelia Carter was incompetent was not a position they could maintain with straight faces. The divorce proceedings would continue. Elena estimated a timeline, and the timeline was longer than Amelia wanted, but shorter than she had feared. And at the end of it, there would be a legal document that said she was no longer Marcus Hale's wife, which was the most ordinary thing she had wanted in a long time. There's one more thing, Elena said. The assets that were frozen. Yes. With the arrest, the freeze has been lifted on your personal accounts. The joint assets are going to be in dispute through the divorce proceedings, which is standard. But your own accounts, your grandmother's money, the independent savings, those are accessible again. She exhaled slowly. Her grandmother's money. $42,000 that a woman who had worked as a seamstress for 40 years had saved and left to her granddaughter specifically, Amelia had always suspected, because she had understood something about what it meant to have something that was yours and couldn't be touched. The fact of it sitting frozen in an account for 2 weeks, inaccessible because Marcus had reached into her financial existence and closed his hand around it. That had been the coldest specific injury of the whole thing, and she had not let herself feel the full weight of it while there were more urgent things to deal with. Thank you, Elena, she said. You did this, Elena said. I want to be clear about that. You walked in here with 61 handwritten pages and a psychiatric evaluation and the nerve to go on camera with unwashed hair and tell the truth without managing how it looked. That's what moved this. Amelia almost said I had help. She stopped herself because it was true and also incomplete, and Elena deserved the accurate version. I had help, she said, and I used it well. Elena made a sound that was almost a laugh. Yes, she said, you did. She found the apartment 3 weeks later. It was on the 4th floor of a building in Brooklyn, not far, as it happened, from the block she had wandered down on a rainy night in October, which she didn't notice until she was standing in the living room looking at the light coming through the windows and felt the specific familiarity of a street she had only been on once, in the dark, not knowing where she was going. The apartment was not large, and it was not the kind of place she had lived in for the past 3 years. The kitchen was smaller than what she was used to, and one of the windows stuck, and the radiator made a sound at night that she would either learn to ignore or learn to love. She wasn't yet sure which. There was a room that would be a nursery eventually, when she had the time and the steadiness to stand in it and make it into what it needed to be. She signed the lease herself. She furnished it slowly over the following weeks, buying things deliberately. Not expensively, not impressively, but specifically, each piece chosen for a reason that had to do with what she actually wanted in her actual space. A reading chair that was better than the rest of the furniture, because reading was the thing she had done her whole life that had always been entirely hers. A kitchen table that was too big for one person because she intended to have people at it. A bed she bought without asking anyone's opinion. Rosa brought her a plant, which arrived on her doorstep one morning with a small note in handwriting Amelia was coming to recognize. My grandmother said plants keep a space honest. Amelia put it in the window where it got the most light and watered it on Thursdays, and did not kill it, which felt like a reasonable beginning. She saw Dante on a Tuesday in November, on no particular occasion. He came to the apartment and she made coffee, and they sat at the too big kitchen table and talked for 3 hours about things that were not the case, not the divorce, not the arrest, not any of the machinery of the last weeks. They talked about his grandmother's restaurant and the way it smelled in winter and why he had kept it. They talked about Dayton and her mother's particular brand of plain-spoken love. They talked about what she was reading and what he was working on and the plant in the window that was doing better than either of them had bet on. At one point she said, "The file Marcus gave investigators." Dante set down his coffee. "Yes." "How is it going?" "Slowly," he said. "My attorney is thorough. There are 3 items that are going to require significant navigation." He paused. "I'm not going to lie to you about what that means. There's a version of the next year that involves considerable legal difficulty on my end." "I know," she said. "I've been thinking about it." "And?" She looked at him directly. "And I'm not going anywhere," she said. "I want to be clear about that. Not because I owe you something. I have decided that I am going to be extremely careful, going forward, about the things I do because I feel obligated versus the things I do because I choose them. I'm telling you I'm not going anywhere because I choose to be here, because I want to be." He looked at her for a long moment. His face did the thing it sometimes did, the controlled surface with something underneath that he didn't always bring out into the open, not because he was hiding it, but because he was a man who had spent a long time in a world where restraint was survival, and some habits took time to unlearn. "That's going to require patience," he said, "with me, with the way I operate. There are things I do that don't have clean explanations, and the legal situation—" "Dante," she said, "I spent 3 years married to a man who explained everything and lied about all of it. I'll take complicated truth over clean deception." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'm not a safe choice." "Neither am I," she said. "I'm a woman in the middle of a federal divorce case who's 4 months pregnant and just signed a lease on an apartment with a sticky window and a radiator that sounds like a small animal. I'm not offering you safe. I'm offering you real." He looked at her, and what she saw in his face in that moment was not the controlled version, not the operational version, not the man who had answers to everything and a car 7 minutes away. It was something older and quieter than any of that. The part of a person that exists before they became the thing they learned to be in order to survive. "Real," he said. "Real," she said. Marcus Hale went to trial the following spring. The proceedings lasted 11 weeks. Patricia Dunmore testified on the 7th day, quietly, without drama, in the specific voice of a woman who has held something inside for a long time and is finally putting it down. The recording was admitted into evidence after 2 days of arguments about its admissibility, and when the prosecutors played it in court, the room was very quiet in a way that the reporters present later described as the quietest they had ever heard a courtroom. Amelia did not attend the trial. She followed it through Elena and through the news, and once through a phone call with Patricia Dunmore, who had become something she did not yet have a precise word for. Not a friend exactly, but a person who understood a specific thing about her life that almost no one else could, and that understanding had its own kind of intimacy. On the day the verdict was read, she was in her apartment. She had the radio on, and then she turned it off, and she sat in the reading chair and she waited, And when Elena called, she answered on the first ring and listened and said thank you and hung up. Guilty. On all counts. The sentence, when it came 6 weeks later, was 22 years. She sat with that number. She turned it over. 22 years. She was 34 years old, which meant that in 22 years she would be 56, and her child would be in their early 20s, and the world would be shaped differently than it was shaped now in ways she couldn't predict. Marcus would be an old man when he came out, if he came out, and whatever he came out as would have nothing to do with her, and that was, she found to her own mild surprise, not satisfying so much as simply correct. The right ending for the right reasons. Not revenge. Not justice in the large abstract sense. Just consequence, arriving eventually, as it does for people who have spent years believing themselves exempt from it. She did not hate him. She had discovered, over months, that she did not have the capacity for sustained hatred, which was something she had once thought was a weakness and now understood was just a fact about her. Neutral, neither admirable nor pathetic, just the truth of how she was built. She felt the baby move, which the baby had been doing with increasing frequency and conviction since month 5, as if aware that the space it occupied was going to be finite, and it intended to make itself known while it had the room. She put her hand on her stomach. "Hey," she said quietly, to the room, to the small moving presence inside her. "It's done." Her daughter was born on a Thursday in late January, at 6:42 in the morning, in a hospital 2 miles from the apartment. It was not easy. Nothing about the 14 hours that preceded that moment was easy, and Amelia had decided early in the pregnancy that she was not going to perform equanimity about the hard parts, that she was going to be afraid when she was afraid, and in pain when she was in pain, and that she was not going to smile through things that didn't warrant smiling. She did not smile through it. She swore, at one point, with a fluency and specificity that impressed even the nurse. Her mother was there, which was the thing she had wanted most without knowing how to ask for it, and her mother held her hand with the grip of a woman who had done this herself alone 35 years ago and was not going to allow her daughter to do it without someone holding on. Dante was in the waiting room. She had not asked him to come. He had come. When it was over and she was holding her daughter and her mother was crying in the quietly controlled way her mother cried, as if the tears were a leak she was managing rather than something she was allowing, Amelia looked at the face of this person she had just met. Her daughter looked back at her. She weighed 7 pounds and 4 ounces, and she had dark hair, already, and the particular expression of a person who has arrived somewhere new and is taking inventory of the situation before deciding how to respond to it, which struck Amelia, in the flooded and exhausted clarity of the first minutes of her daughter's life, as an extremely good way to start. "Hi," Amelia said. "I know you. I've been talking to you." The baby didn't answer. She kept taking inventory. "I'm going to make some mistakes," Amelia said quietly, because her mother had stepped out, and for a moment it was just the two of them, and she could say the true thing. "I already have, and I'm going to keep making them because I'm a person, and that's what people do. But I want you to know that everything I've done since October was for you. Not in a way that makes you responsible for it. Just, you were the reason I was brave enough to go. You were the reason I stopped adjusting." She paused. The baby's dark eyes were moving, taking in light, taking in the room. "We're going to be okay," Amelia said. "We're going to be better than okay." She believed it. They named her Eleanor, after no one in particular, just a name Amelia had carried in the back of her mind since she was a girl. The name of someone who sounded like they would make decisions thoughtfully and hold their ground in difficult weather. Dante met her in the hallway when Amelia's mother came back, and she watched him through the glass panel of the room door. Watched him hold Eleanor with the careful steadiness of a man who understood that certain things require a kind of attention that his hands were not entirely accustomed to and was learning without performing the learning. Eleanor looked at him the same way she had looked at everything, taking inventory, withholding judgment, deciding. Later, when her mother had gone to get coffee and Eleanor was asleep and the room was in the particular quiet of hospital afternoons, Dante sat beside her bed in the chair that was slightly too small for him, and she looked at the ceiling, and they were both tired in a way that had the specific weight of earned exhaustion, the kind that comes not from running, but from having run as far as you needed to, and finally, for the moment, stopping. "You should sleep," he said. "In a minute," she said. Outside the window, January held the city in its gray and honest grip. No ornament, no dressing. Just the thing itself, plain and cold and clean, exactly what it was. She turned her head and looked at him. He looked back. She thought about a rainy night and a restaurant with faded gold letters and a card placed on a bar by a man who had decided, in the space of 20 minutes, that she was worth the full cost of whatever came next. She thought about a parking lot at 2 in the morning and a woman in a back room counting to over 100 while the house held its breath. She thought about 61 pages of handwriting and a camera and the particular quality of her own voice, saying the true thing out loud for the first time in years. She thought about her daughter's dark eyes taking inventory of the world and finding it, apparently, worthy of continued attention. "Thank you," she said. Not for everything, which would have been too large. Not for anything specific, just the word, plain and accurate, meaning what it meant. He didn't say "you're welcome" because that wasn't the right answer either. What he said was, "We got here." She looked at the ceiling again. We did. Outside, January. Inside, the sound of Eleanor breathing, which was the newest sound in the world and already, impossibly, the most familiar. Amelia closed her eyes. For the first time in longer than she could accurately measure, she did not need to count.